No.
No, did they give you hours already?
Yeah.
Over here or something. I'm too tired. I don't really like that. Yeah, one of these like the trees and between here. That's the open again.
Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent parasite is spreading.
Hunt it down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core.
Oh yeah. Red light.
Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent parasite is spreading.
Hunt it down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core. Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunt it down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core.
Hunted down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core. Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunted down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core.
It was interesting the first time we played it. I know. Me, I can be whatever.
Oh, see, yeah.
Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunted down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core.
You know I'm just once Bria comes back from Japan, immediately afterwards I go to Japan.
Wow.
And like it's so screwed up too, because like the whole thing is Japan. Like,
不学口外，
yeah, they do.
你不学口外，
Oh my.
Ethan.
哦，
I don't feel like it.
对啊，
What was I saying? Oh yeah.
Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunted down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core. Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunt it down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core. Systems down. Enemy detected. A silent cyber parasite is spreading.
Hunt it down fast.
Be rewarded with up to $30,000. You in? Every keystroke counts. Every second matters. It's a race to the core.
Because I don't have
So the timeline is 8:55. I'm not gonna start yet, but maybe let's just have like a really like chill chit chat session lah. So JavaScript is one of the courses where one of the workshops where it's like the most fast paced. I need to create a disclaimer first. So y'all will realize that throughout the entire workshop later, right? I will be pretty much rushing for time. I know I have 3.5 hours, right? But honestly, for 3.5 hours to get to where I need to get to integrate JS into HTML and CSS is not easy. So if y'all are feeling lost at any point in time, right? Can I please urge y'all to approach any of the facils? The facils are all wearing the lanyard. Okay, or if it's really an exercise, please also do approach me. If there are any questions, yeah, please go to our facils, or you can also go to the Discord, which is questions for speakers. If y'all cannot find it, do sort out right now. If y'all cannot find it. And of course, please do clarify like if you all have any facing any issues or anything, because as I said, it's going to be a very fast-paced workshop. Your brain might be a little fried after this workshop. So please do clarify with our facilitators who are wearing the lanyard. You all will realize that I'm also not going to go through everything in the slides. I will only have the time to go through 5 exercises today, which is exercise 1 to 5. But exercise 6 to 9, right? I will provide the answers later on, but also provide the question inside the same folder. So if you all want on your own, you all can try out exercise 6 to 9. What else I have to say? Oh yeah, you all also seeing me for SQL databases. Yeah. So you all are literally seeing me for 7.5 hours today. Yeah. Minus away the 1 hour break. Yeah. So good luck guys. Now I'll just wait for a while more. Oh yeah, please do ensure that you have all the resources installed, because I don't want it to be a case where we have to wait for people to install stuff, because as I mentioned, it's very fast paced. A lot to cover today to get to how to integrate with HTML and CSS. So I honestly do not have the time to make y'all install the applications. So if y'all have any issues, please do sound out now, and our facilitators will help you out. Yeah. Anything else I need to? Oh yes, please do ensure that you know where to find the slides. It's under December conference workshop materials. So there I have 3 URLs, right? The first one is slides. The second one is the exercises folder. So download all of it. Then the last one is installation guide, which you should have already referred to before the workshop. Yeah, other than that, just chill first. I'll start at 0900 Hotel Sharp. Oh yeah, one more thing. I don't expect y'all to really fully understand the content, but I think where I'm trying to come from with this workshop is I hope that y'all can gain an awareness or gain an appreciation of the functionalities of JavaScript. So that means that for example, if next time you want to create a web page, right, but you don't know how to, at least this workshop gives you a first starting step into what you can do. And then if you need further clarification, the way that the slides are structured, if you'll see later on, right, is that you can actually run it through on your own by yourself. But my purpose of being here to teach the workshop is I need to explain to you how does the functions or whatever I'm going to teach link to the examples I'm going to provide. So if you open up the slides, right, you'll notice that there's a lot of examples, right? If y'all are lost, right, just spend some time and think through why the exercises work, why the examples work the way they do. The examples are normally written on the left of the slide, then the explanation on the right of the slide. So if y'all are lost, just pause for a moment and just slowly think through why the examples work the way they do. Of course, if you have any questions, pump it into our Discord. If you're shy or if you're not shy, you can raise your hand and our facilitators at the back wearing the lanyard will attend to you. Yeah. All right, the time is. So a very good morning, everyone. I know it's very early in the morning, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to SMU today. Welcome to this conference on JavaScript for web development. So I'm Brian. I'll be your workshop speaker for today. Before we start today, I think you've heard this a lot of times now, but this program wouldn't have been possible without our kind sponsors. So we have SMU, our venue sponsor. We have GitHub, CSIT, Expressive, Wizard Zines, HTX, YouthTech.sg, DDAS, as well as Fingerprinting. So without their support, this event today wouldn't have been possible. So if possible, y'all should go and definitely support our sponsors. So without further ado, let's get started. So welcome to JavaScript. Before this workshop, y'all should have already referred to the installation guide to install the following applications: VS Code, Node.js, as well as Code Runner. And y'all should also have downloaded the folder labeled exercises, with the files name exercise 1 to exercise 9. So once again, house rules. If you need any assistance, please do raise your hand, and our workshop facilities wearing the lanyard, they will attend to you. And if you're like a bit shy and you don't feel like asking, you can also pump your questions through Discord under questions for speakers, JavaScript, and I will answer them as soon as I can after the workshop. So today on our contents, we have quite a lot to cover. We have a total of, you can see, 15 chapters. So first chapter is on the introduction to what is JavaScript. Second will be the fundamentals. Third will be the data types that you're going to learn. Fourth is going to be the variables. And under data types, you have your numbers, booleans, and strings. This will be chapters 5, 6, 7. After which, we'll look at functions, how to make your code reusable. Then arrays and objects, how to store data. For chapter 11, debugging techniques, I've decided after yesterday's run that I wouldn't want to cover it because it's too much content already. So I'll just skip debugging techniques. I'll go back to it if I have time. Chapter 12, multiple times. Then 13 and 14, document object model and events. These will be content that will link to HTML and CSS that you have learned yesterday from Annie and Cynthia. Last but not least, we'll end off with a simple conclusion on what we have covered so far and how to further your learning. So let's start. Chapter 1 is on introduction. So what exactly is JavaScript? As you probably have heard yesterday from your HTML and CSS workshop, JavaScript is a programming language that will allow you to make your websites interactive as well as dynamic. So it's a high-level language. What this means is that it's designed to be easily understood by humans, like yourselves. So it works together with HTML and CSS, what you learned yesterday, in order to create functional websites. And a fun fact is that 99% of all websites on the web will use JavaScript for their web page behavior. So just to give you another summary again, HTML and CSS, HTML defines the structure of the website, whereas CSS will add style to a website. So this was covered yesterday in HTML and CSS workshop. So in this workshop, JS, we're going to be learning how to provide interactivity to our website. So on to chapter 2 now, which is the fundamentals of JavaScript. So this morning, I asked you all to install some applications, but what exactly do these applications do? Well, first and foremost, Visual Studio Code, this is your code editor. You will write your code here. So it's the same platform that I've been using for HTML and CSS in your previous yesterday. Node.js, this is your runtime environment. This will allow you to run JavaScript outside of your web browser. Because if you don't have Node.js, what will happen is that JavaScript will only be able to work inside a web browser. So with Node.js, you can run JavaScript anywhere on your machine, including on Visual Studio Code. Next, I'll be introducing to you the Code Runner extension. So Code Runner, what it does is that if you install it properly in Visual Studio Code, there'll be this play button. There'll be at the top right-hand corner of the screen, as you can see here in red. So if you want to run JavaScript code, you can just press the button to run your code. But do remember that before you run the code, you must save your code by pressing Ctrl+S if you're on Windows or Command+S if you're on Mac OS before clicking on the play button. So let me just give you a quick demonstration of how Code Runner works. So let's just, actually I will demo the next part first before I go into a full demo. So the next part is on creating a JS file. So how you do this is, number one, you click on File at the top left-hand corner of Visual Studio Code. Then you click on, you choose which folder you want. Then you click on Open Folder and select the folder you want to store the file in. Then after which, under your Explorer, under your folder name, you will right-click and you'll click on New File. You'll then name your file. And remember to add a .js at the end. This is a file extension for JavaScript files. It tells Visual Studio Code that what you're running is a JavaScript file. After that, you press Enter when you're done. So now I'll be doing a quick demonstration on the fundamentals of using JavaScript in VS Code. So as I mentioned just now, if you want to open a file, open a folder, just press File at the top. Then after that, press Open Folder, and then choose whichever folder that you want to store your JavaScript file in. So let's just say I choose this folder over here. So how do I create a JS file? What I can do is I can right-click on Explorer, I can press New File, and then I can just name my file whatever I want. So for example, let's just say I want to call it bbcs.js. So the file name is bbcs, but I need to add a .js because I need to tell Visual Studio Code that this is a JavaScript file. And .js is the file extension for JavaScript. So after I'm done, I just press Enter. And what I have on the right here, this is where I can input my JavaScript code. So later on, I'll be going into how exactly to write JavaScript code. So if you want to write JavaScript code, you just enter whatever that you want inside here, and the code runner button, this play button, this is actually used to run your code. So I will be doing another demonstration later when I show you how to write some simple lines of code. All right, so let's go into the coding proper. So the first statement that I'll be teaching you all today is called console.log. This is by far, I think, one of the most important statements in JavaScript. What this does is that it will output information inside the parentheses, which is the round brackets over here. It will output information into the console. In JavaScript, you should also end your statements with a semicolon, which is this symbol over here, in order to make them clearer. So let me give you an example. Over here, I have console.log building blocks and console.log 2025. So what this does is that whatever that's inside the brackets, for example, building blocks as well as 2025, these will be output into the console. So now you might be wondering, what exactly is a console? Well, let me just give you a simple introduction to what is a console. So a console is a place where you output things. You can actually find it at the bottom of the screen in Visual Studio Code. And if it's not there, what you can do is that you can press View at the top, then after that find Terminal and click on it. So now I will just do a simple demonstration of how this works in VS Code. So imagine that I open up VS Code, right? As you can see, I don't have anything right now in my JS file, but I want to open up my console. So what I can do is I can press View at the top. I press View, then after that I press Terminal. And then as you can see, this is the console. The console is opened up right now. So anything that I use, if I use console.log, whatever that's inside my parentheses, this will be output over to this area over here. So let me just give an example now with the two console.log statements that I had previously. So I had console.log. I had console.log building blocks, right? After that, I also had console.log 2025. Okay, oops. Let me just turn this off real quick. So what this does is that it will output building blocks as well as 2025 onto my console. So if I press the play button at the top, which is to run the code, as you can see, building blocks as well as 2025 have been output to my console over here, up there. Okay, so this shows that the console.log statement, it does allow you to print whatever that you want in the parentheses over to the console. So now you might be wondering, hey, what happened to my two double apostrophes over here? So this is part of strings. I'll be covering more in depth on strings later. All right, so next I'll be going on to comments. So what if you want to write human language, like for example, English, but in order to like create a note for yourself, but you don't want the computer to be able to read it in order to prevent any errors. But what you can do is to write comments. So all of the comments are ignored by the program and are only for humans to read. You can create comments in a few ways. You can use a double slash. What this does is that it creates a comment that can occupy one line, or you can start a multi-line comment with a forward slash and an asterisk, followed by an asterisk and a forward slash. This is for comments that span multiple lines. So in the examples over here, I have double slash, and after I have a comment over here. This is a comment that takes up one line. I can also add comments to the end of existing code. Like for example, after the semicolon, I can just add whatever comments that I want. And if I want a comment that spans multiple lines, what I can do is I can start a comment with a forward slash and an asterisk, type whatever that I want, and then after that, I can end with an asterisk and a forward slash. So that's how you can create comments in JavaScript. So we're done with chapter 2 on the fundamentals of JavaScript. Now let's go on to chapter 3, which is on the data types in JavaScript. So what are data types? Well, data types are the kind of value that a variable holds. Very vague, I know, but let me give you some examples of what are the data types in JavaScript. So we have a few data types in JavaScript. First and foremost, integers. Integers are your whole numbers. For example, like 1, 23, 456. These are numbers that are whole numbers. We don't have any fractional or any decimal part. Next, we have our floating point numbers. These are numbers with a decimal point. For example, pi, 3.14, Euler's constant, 2.718, or like golden ratio, 1.618. These are numbers with a decimal point and are called floats in JavaScript. We also have booleans. Booleans are values that can only take the value of true or false. Last but not least, we have strings. So strings are sequences of characters that are enclosed in quotes. For example, just now in the example, I had building blocks. You notice that they were in quotation marks. So this is an example of a string. Do remember that you must include the quotation marks whenever you define strings. So for example, building blocks over here has 2 quotation marks. JavaScript over here has 2 quotation marks. All right, so now let's go on to chapter 4. Chapter 4 will be on variables. So what exactly are variables? Well, variables will allow you to store data that you can access as well as modify throughout your entire program. Think of them like containers that will allow you to store information. So let me give you some examples of how you can use variables in JavaScript. So let's just say now I want to create a variable. I want to initialize a variable. How do I do it? Well, I can use the reserved word called let. So what this does is that let tells JavaScript that I want to define a variable. So after let, I will have the name of my variable. So let's just say I want to call my variable variable. So I define the name of the variable, and after that, I'll use an equal sign. So the equal sign will allow you to assign a value into your variable. So with this equal sign over here, what comes after is the value that you want your variable to take. So in this case, I want my variable to take the string called building blocks. So this entire line, let variable equals building blocks, means that I want to set the value of the variable called variable to the string building blocks. Next, I'll go on to reassigning variables. So in JavaScript, you're able to give a new value to a variable that you've already assigned. And you can let this, you can do this whenever you want. Do note that when you want to reassign a variable, you cannot use the word let again. You have to do the assignment without the word let, because let is only for initializing a variable. So let me give you an example of how this works. So imagine that I have the same example where a variable has a value of building blocks. Now, if I want to reassign the variable, all I need to do is I need to write variable is equals to and my new value. In this case, my new value, for example, will be 2025. So I'll just write variable equals 2025. This means that I'll be storing the value of 2025 inside variable. So now, variable will take the value of 2025 and it will never take the value of building blocks anymore. So on to the second part of the example here. What if I've already defined variable on top, but now I want to use let variable again? Well, what will be returned to me will be an error because variable has already been declared. So do remember that if you want to reassign a variable, do not use the let reserved word. Use the let reserved word only for initializing a variable. So now more onto variable naming. What are the rules for naming your variables? Well, you can basically name your variables anything, but they have to follow certain rules. First and foremost, your variables must begin with a letter, an underscore, or a $sign. Your variables also cannot start with a number. Your variables are also case sensitive. For example, having participants starting with a letter P, a capital P, and participants starting with a small p, these are different variables. So thus, these two variables, JavaScript will handle them differently. Last but not least, reserved words cannot be used. So for example, just now I introduced to you the reserved word let, which is used to initialize a variable. Here, if I want, I'm not allowed to define the variable called let again, because if I want to reference let, then JavaScript won't know, am I trying to reference the variable or am I trying to initialize a new variable? So thus, reserved words cannot be used. So along the way, we'll be going into other reserved words. I'll point them out as we go along. But some other examples of reserved words that cannot be used include function as well as return. So later on, if you don't be worried about reserved words yet, later on I'll be introducing to you more reserved words such that you will know not to use them in your variables. So JavaScript has this property called dynamic typing. What this means is that you do not need to specify the data type of a variable when you declare it. Notice how when I define my variable called building blocks, I didn't have to say building blocks is a string, or I didn't have to say building blocks is a number. Instead, all I did was I just used let variable equals building blocks. As a result of this, you are allowed to change the type of variable that you want throughout the program. For example, in this example over here, I started off with a string, and then after that, I changed it to a number. This is allowed in JavaScript, but might not be allowed in other programming languages. So do remember this if you choose to learn other programming languages. So as you can see in this example here, the type of the variable has actually changed from a string to a number. So this shows that JavaScript is has has this property of dynamic typing, where my data type of a variable can always change whenever I want it to. So next, I'll be going into type of. So what is type of? Type of will allow you to find out the data type that is stored inside a variable. So using the same property of dynamic typing, let's apply this into an example. So let's just say I have the variable known as a string building blocks. If I want to find out the type that is inside a variable, what I can do is I can type of variable. But how do I see this? Well, I'll need to use a console.log statement to output this result into the console. So I will type console.log, and inside the parentheses, I'll type of variable. What will be output to me will be string. And this is true because building blocks here is a string. It's a sequence of characters enclosed in quotes. So now what if I change variable to 2025? So 2025 is a number. Type of variable. What will be returned to me is number, because 2025 is a number. So for the last part of the example, let's just say now I want to change the variable to the value true. As I mentioned just now, true is a boolean. So thus, if I type console.log type of variable and I log it to the console, what will be returned to me is a boolean, because well, true is a boolean. So type of is basically used to find out the data type that is stored inside my variable. All right, so that concludes chapter 4 on variables. So now I'll be going on to chapter 5, which is on numbers. So as I've mentioned just now, there are many types of numbers in JavaScript. So the two that you have learned are integers and floating point numbers. So integers are your whole numbers that don't have any fractional or decimal part, like 10, -20, 0, etc. Whereas your floating point numbers, these are your numbers that have a decimal point, like for example, 1.2, 3.45, etc. There's another type of number. This is called infinity. Don't really have to deal with this now, but it may come up later on. So infinity is basically a number that is beyond the maximum limit, similar to what you have in mathematics. The first part of numbers is basically your arithmetic operators. So just like mathematics, this is just very similar, but there might be a few differences in terms of the symbols that are being used. So for addition and subtraction, they are the same. It's just plus and minus. But for multiplication, you have an asterisk. So I know in math, you use a cross for multiplication, but here in JavaScript, we use an asterisk to represent multiplication. We also have division. Instead of the 2 dots and a line in the middle for division, here we have a / to represent division in JavaScript. And on the point of infinity, do note that in JavaScript, if you divide a number by 0, it returns infinity. Although this is not mathematically sound, this is a property in JavaScript, so do take note of that. Last but not least, the next one is about remainder. Remainder is otherwise known as modulo, and this will be a percentage symbol. I'll explain more about remainder when I go into the example. And the last arithmetic operator is exponentiation, basically where you raise one number to the power of another. So it's a lot to take in, but let me just quickly give you an example. So say I have 3 variables here, num1, num2, and num3. Num1 has a value of 3, num2 has a value of 4, and num3 has a value of 6. Now, let's just say I want to do addition, right? How do I do this in JavaScript? Well, all I need to do is I can just write num1 plus num2. So num1 is 3, num2 is 4. So num1 plus num2 is 3 plus 4, which is 7. Now, I want to store this as the variable result1. So what I can do is I can write let result1 be equals to num1 plus num2. So after this, result1 will now have the value of 7. That's why when I log result1 to the console, what will be returned to me will be 7. So you can apply this logic for all of the remaining examples. I won't be going through them. If you need any clarification, please do ask our facilitators or pump it into Discord. The more important example that I will be going through will be on remainder. Because remainder is not something that's known very mathematically. So let me try to explain. In this example here, I have num2 modulo, which is the percentage sign, num2 modulo num1. So what am I doing? Basically, I'm doing a division, but what I hope to get out of it is the remainder. Num2 is 4, num1 is 3. So what is 4 divided by 3? 4 divided by 3 is actually 1 with a remainder of 1. So we take the value of this remainder, and in this case, I'm storing it as a variable result9. So therefore, result9 will take a value of 1 because 4 divided by 3 is 1 remainder 1. And here I want to track the value of the remainder, which is 1. So that's why when I log result 9 to the console, it is 1. Whereas for division, you are basically getting the whole, you're basically getting the value when one number is divided by another number, as you can see in the examples at the top. 4 divided by 3 is 4/3, which is this 1 point recurring 3, and 3 over 4 is 0.75. Whereas for remainder, you're just getting the remainder of the division. So on the exponentiation, this is basically just doing power. In this example here, I have num1 exponentiation num2. So basically, num1 to the power of num2. So num1 is 3, num2 is 4. So if I do 3 to the power of 4, this is actually 81. If I store this as the variable result 10, and if I log result 10 to the console, what will be returned to me will be 81. So this, I'll go over the order of operations. So this is also just like mathematics. We will follow PEMDAS. PEMDAS stands for parentheses, exponentiation, then multiplication and division, followed by addition and subtraction. This means that when you solve a mathematical equation, or rather when JavaScript solves a mathematical equation, it will follow this exact order to solve it, just like in mathematics. I won't be delving into examples here, but if you need any clarification, please do ask our sales or pump it through Discord. The more important thing is on compound assignments. So compound assignments is something that's not in mathematics, and so I want to spend more time on it. So you notice that it's basically the same symbol, just with an equal sign at the back. For example, plus equals, minus equals, asterisk equals, and / equals. So what exactly does this do? Let me give you an example to illustrate my point. So let's just say I have a variable, let num equals 3. Well, how can I use compound assignment? If I write, for example, num plus equals 2, this is fundamentally the same as writing num equals num plus 2. So if you come from a mathematical standpoint, this is false because, how can num be equals to num plus 2? I'm just proving that 0 is equals to 2. But in programming, how this works is that I will evaluate whatever that's on the right side of the equal sign, and I will set this as a value of the left side of the equal sign. So let me explain now. If I have num equals 3, what will happen if I run num plus equals 2 is that I'm basically solving the right side first, which is 3 plus 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5. Then I'm setting 5 as the value of num. So that's why when I log num to the console, what will be returned to me is 5. So let me repeat again. You've got to, what you need to do here is you will evaluate whatever that's on the right side of the equal sign and set this as a value to the left side of the equal sign. So if you follow the rest of the examples, you realize that they all follow the exact same logic here, so I won't be going through it. Okay, maybe I'll spend a bit more time on the remainder and the exponentiation part. It's a bit newer. So by the way, previously, the example was supposed to flow from this slide to this slide. So previously, our value of num was 6. Okay, I'll tell you right now, num is 6. Now I want to do num modulo equals to 4. So what this is basically same as writing num equals num modulo 4. So what is 6 divided by 4? 6 divided by 4 is 1 with a remainder of 2. Hence, if I evaluate the right side here, this will be 2. And I'll set this as the variable num. So that's why when I log num to the console, what is returned to me is the value 2. For exponentiation, it should be quite straightforward because I have 2 from the previous example. If I do num to the power of 5, 2 to the power of 5 is 32. I'm setting this as the value num. So thus when I log num to the console, the answer is 32. So next I'll be delving into the math object. So the math object will allow you to provide methods to perform your calculations. So there are too many methods here. I won't go into all of them, but the 4 that I'll be diving into today are math.min, math.max, math.round, and math.apps. So the names are pretty self-explanatory. Math.min, what it does is that it will return the minimum value of a set of numbers, whereas math.max will return the maximum value of a set of numbers. So how do I do this? Let's just say I have, okay, let me illustrate math.min first. So here I have an example of single-digit integers that are from 0 to 9, right? In some random order. And I want to find the minimum value out of all of these. These are all separated by commas. So what I can do is I can use math.min. Then after that, I'll throw all of the numbers I want to consider inside the brackets. Then after that, I will set this as the variable minimum. So this will run and it will pick out the smallest value, which is 0. So thus minimum will have a value of 0. That's why when I log minimum to the console, the answer is 0. The same logic can be applied for math.max, but now I'm trying to find a maximum value. So out of all of these numbers here, the greatest number is 9, right? That's why math.max here will return 9. So the variable maximum here will take a value of 9. And that's why when I log maximum to the console, the answer is 9. Next, on to math.round. So what math.round does is that it will round your number to the nearest integer depending on the digit after the decimal point. So just like in math, if the digit after the decimal point is 0 to 4, it will round down. And if it's up, and if it's 5 to 9, then it will round up. So in this case, to give an example, math.round 3.14, which is pi basically. If I use math.round 3.14, it will give me 3 because the digit after the decimal point is 1. So thus, we will round down to 3. In this second example here, we'll go to this third example over here, math.round 2.718. Well, the digit after the decimal point is 7. So 2.718 is closer to 3 than it is to 2. That's why if you use math.round 2.718, and if you log this to the console, we'll get the value of 3, because here we are rounding up. Next, I'll be going on to math.abs. So, as its name implies, abs means the absolute value of a number. For those who don't know what is an absolute value, basically what it means is that this is the distance of this number from 0, regardless of the direction. So that means that it's always positive. So if I have that, so the absolute value of 3 is 3, and the absolute value of -3 is 3, because -3 is 3 away from 0. So to give you an example of how this works in JavaScript, if I want to consider the absolute value of 3, what I can do is math.abs, and inside the parentheses, I'll put 3. Then I'll log this to the console, and what will be returned to me is the number 3. In the second example, math.abs, instead of parentheses, I'll put -3. If I log this to the console, what will be returned to me would be the number 3. So math.abs is for getting the absolute value of the number inside the parentheses. Next, I'll be going on to pass float. So what this does is that I'll be able to pass my string argument, and I'll be able to return a floating point number. So just a quick caveat, what's an argument? An argument is a thing that you return inside the brackets of whatever method that you're trying to call. So for example, oh, and by the way, this will extract the number from the beginning of the string. So to give you an example here, I have a string 3.14. Well, if I want to convert this to a number, what I can do is I can use pass float, and inside the brackets, I'll put 3.14 as a string. If I log this to the console, what will be returned to me will be the number 3.14. So let's look at this with other examples. Let's just say my string is 3.14a. If I use pass float, and if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is 3.14 also, because pass float will extract the number from the beginning of my string. In this case, it was 3.14. The third example, 3.14.1. So as you all know, numbers can only have one decimal place. So thus, whatever that's after the first decimal place will be ignored. That's why if I use pass float 3.14.1, and if I log this to the console, I will only get 3.14. The last example here, I have a 3.14. Remember that pass float will only extract the number from the beginning of the string. So that's why at the beginning of the string, I don't have a number. It's a letter, right? It's A. Hence, if I pass float this and I log it, what will be returned to me is NaN. So NaN is actually short for not a number, and more often than not, it's basically an error code when you do something wrong inside JavaScript. So do take note of this. We might be looking at it in future examples. So passInt is next. PassInt is basically a similar idea to passFloat, but instead of passing a string and returning a float, now you're passing a string and returning an integer. Similarly, it will extract the number from the beginning of the string. Example time. So I have the string 3, and I want to convert it to an integer, right? So I'll use passInt string 3, and if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me will be the number 3. In the next example over here, I have passInt with a string 3a. So it will extract the number from the beginning of the string. So here the number here is 3. It will ignore A. So if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is 3. So now what if my argument is a float? Well, here I have 3.14. So it's a float, right? It's a decimal number as a string. If I use parseInt string 3.14, and if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is 3, because I will only want to get the integer portion of the string. Last but not least, in this example here, similar example, A3.14, and if I use parseInt on this string, and I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is not a number. And this is true because there is no number at the start of the string. The start of the string is a letter, and thus NaN will be returned to me. So before we go on to our first exercise, the last method that we'll be learning is called to fix. A number to the nearest value that can be represented with the specified number of decimal places. This specified number of decimal places will be inside the parentheses over here. Comes after toFixed. So let me give you an example. Here I have pi set to 9 decimal places as the variable num1. What if I want to round pi to 2 decimal places? What I can do is I can use num1. So I'm selecting num1, right? Then I will use dot toFixed. After the toFixed, inside the parentheses, I'll indicate I want 2 decimal places. Now, if I log this entire statement to the console, what will be returned to me is 3.14, because pi to 2dp is 3.14. So let's look at the second example. In this example, I have similar to pi, but now it's 3.14592654. So I said let this be num2, right? Now, if I use num2 dot toFixed 2, meaning I want to round num2 to 2 decimal places, what will be returned to me is 3.15. Now, in this case, I'm rounding up because the digit in the third decimal place is 5. So this is basically the elementary mathematics. Just remember that 0 to 4, rounding down, 5 to 9, rounding up. The last example over here is what happens if you call toFixed without any arguments. If that happens, then your number is printed with 0 decimal places. So for example, if I have pi over here, and I use num1 dot toFixed with nothing inside the parentheses, and if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is 3. Whoops. What will be returned to me is 3, because without arguments, my number is printed with 0 dp. In this case, pi to 0 decimal places is 3. All right, so we have reached the first checkpoint. This is our first exercise of the day. So right now, I want you all to open up exercise1.js in Visual Studio Code and complete exercise 1. But before we get started, let me explain what is the task behind exercise 1. So in exercise 1, as you all can see, oops, sorry. So let me make this a bit bigger. All right, so your task for today for exercise 1 is that you're given the total price and quantity of bags of chips. So as you can see here, total price, this is the total price of the bags of chips, and this is a quantity of how many bags of chips there are. Your first task is that you have to convert total price into a float. This is a floating point number, and store it as the variable price float. After that, you will convert quantity into an integer and store it as the variable quantity int. Okay. Thereafter, you will calculate the price of 1 bag of chips. So note that this is 3 bags, right? You'll calculate the price of 1 bag of chips, store it as the variable chips price, and then after that, log this to the console. Last but not least, you will round chips price to 2dp, and you log it to the console. So I'll give you all about 5 minutes to attempt this exercise. Once again, if you have any questions, please do look for our facilitators wearing the lanyard, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. So yeah, get coding. Yeah.
So, when you think of like something that's yes, you will feel like
Yes. Why?
it doesn't feel like that.
All right, so your 5 minutes is up. Let me just do a quick demonstration of the suggested answer for exercise 1. So in exercise 1, your first task was to convert total price into a float and store it as the variable price float. So how do we initialize a variable? Well, we'll just do let, and my name of the variable is price float. Then I'll use equals, and then after this, I will use the pass float in order to convert my total price from a string into a float. So a pass float, total price. Next, I was supposed to convert quantity into an integer and store it as the variable quantity int. So let quantity int be equals to pass int. Now I want to store it as an integer, right? Pass int quantity. So first two steps are done. The next step, I want to calculate the price of 1 bag of chips. So I have $5.99 for 3 bags of chips. So for 1 bag of chips, it will just be total price divided by quantity. But I want to store this somewhere. I was told here to store it as the variable chips price. So I will let chips price be equals to total price divided by quantity. After this, I need to log chips price into the console. So what I can console.log chips price. Last but not least, I'm supposed to round chips price to 2 decimal places. So what I will do is I will just use console.log, then chips price dot to fixed. Inside here, I want 2 dp. So in the parentheses, I'll put 2. All right. Now I save it. Please save your file before you run it inside VS Code. So save it, then press play. Hey, wait. Plus float. Okay. Wait, sorry, let me check something real quick. Huh? Oh, sorry, my bad. Thanks for pointing it out. Quantity int, yes, okay. There we go. So that's the answer that you should be getting, which is 1.99 blah 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 blah. This is your price for 1 bag of chips before rounding to 2 dp. Then here is the price after rounding to 2 dp, which is 2.00. Yeah, thanks everyone for pointing it out. So yeah, that was the end to exercise 1 on numbers. So now we'll be going into chapter 6, which is on booleans. So in booleans, as I mentioned just now, booleans are a data type that only has true and false values. So with true and false values, it might seem a bit easy, but there are a lot of things that we can do with booleans. So let me give you an example. We start first and foremost with equality operators. What equality operators are? They are 2 equal signs together. What they do is that they will check if the values are equal, but they will not check if your data type are the same. And from this, it will return a boolean. So let me give you an example here. I have var1, var2, var3, var4, right? var1 and var2, they're both the number 1. var3 is the string 1, and var4 is the number 2. So the first example here, I want to check whether var1 is equals to var2. So I want to check if their values are equal, and I want to log each of them to the console. This first one is obviously true. The values for both var1 and var2 are just 1. So nothing too complicated. The second one, a bit more tricky this time. var1 equals var3. We're going to log this to the console, right? So I have number 1 and I have string 1. Here, it will also return true because here I only want to compare the value and not the data type, even though var1 is a number and var3 is a string. For the last one, var1 equals var4. This is obviously false because 1 and 2, the values are not equal. That's why it returns false. Next, onto the strict equality operator. So strict equality operator is represented by 3 equal signs. What this does is that it will check if both your data types as well as the values are the same. And from there, it will return a boolean. Similar example here, var1, var2 with numbers 1 and var3 with the string 1. So let's go to the example. var1 strictly equals to var2. This is true because both the data type are numbers and both the values are 1. Second example, a bit more tricky, var1 equals var3. This is false. The reason why it's false is because now var1 is a number, whereas var3 is a string. So the data types are not the same. So that's why what we return to me is false, because it does not fulfill the condition that the data types are the same. So inequality operators is the exact opposite of the equality operators. This time, instead of using two equal signs for an inequality operator, you'll be using an exclamation mark and an equal sign. This will check if your values are not equal, but it will not care about the data type that you check. So to give an example, same 4 variables, 2 number ones, a string 1 as well as number 2. To check the first one, var1 not equals to var2, this is false. This is false because both the values of var1 and var2 are 1. So are they not equal? It's false because they are equal. Second example, var1 not equals to var3. Is this true or false? The answer is this is false because if you compare the values, both have the value of 1. Therefore, the values are equal. So are they unequal? They are not unequal. That's why it's false. The last example here, var1 not equals to var4. What will be returned to me if I'm comparing 1 and 2? The answer is true because it is true that 1 and 2 have values that are not equal. So similarly to the equality operator, I also have a strict inequality operator. This is represented with an exclamation mark and 2 equal signs. This will check if both of the data types and the values are not the same and return a boolean. So this will get a bit more confusing, so bear with me. First one, var1 not equals var2. Is this true or false? The answer is false. Why is this false? Because both for var1 and var2, both the numbers are 1. Both the values are 1 and both the data types are numbers. So is it true or false that both data types and values are not the same? It is false because both data types and values are the same. For the second example here, this way it gets a bit more tricky. var1 strictly not equals to var3. Is this true or false? The answer is this is true. Now, even though both of the values here are 1, right, we have to consider data type next. So the data type of var1 is a number and the data type of var3 is a string. So is it true that the data type and the value are not the same? It is true because numbers and strings are not the same data type. That's why what will be returned to me is true. The next part, also a bit more on mathematics. This part is more on inequalities. We're going to look at comparison operators. So there are 4 main comparison operators, basically the same ones that you learned in mathematics, but this time with JavaScript syntax. So we have the greater than operator, which is this right like caret. We have the greater than or equals to operator, which is this right caret followed by an equal sign. We have a lesser than operator, which is a left caret, and a lesser than or equals to operator, which is a left caret followed by an equal sign. All of this will return a boolean. So I have too many examples over here, 12 examples over here, but I don't see a need to go through all of them. I'll just go through the first one, and then you can apply the same logic for the remaining of the 11 of the examples. So here I have, we just look at this first statement over here, num2 greater than num1, right? So num2 is 5, if you see in my variable declarations. Num2 is 5, num1 is 3. So num2 is greater than num1. This is true because 5 is greater than 3. That's why when I log this result into the console, what will be returned to me is true. So you can apply this logic for the rest of the examples over here, and you can see why they will be true or false. So I'll skip that and let's go on to if statements. So what are if statements? Basically, in an if statement, a block of code will only run if the condition inside the brackets is true. The conditions are placed inside the brackets after if. If you look at my example over here, I have if, and after you see a pair of round brackets. This is where our conditions go into. After that, you'll see a pair of curly brackets, as you can see over here. This pair of curly brackets is the code block that will run if the condition is true. So let's look at some examples now. I will define a variable called color, and the value of color is a string blue. Now, the first code block over here, if color is equals to blue, this is true because, well, color is indeed blue. That's why this condition over here is true. Because it's true, that's why this first if statement will run. Hence, what will be logged to my console is the color is blue. So this code block will run because the condition is true. Now, let me give an example where the condition is false. So here I have if color is equals to red. This is false because originally I defined color as blue, whereas here it's red. So this condition is false. That's why this log statement for the color is red, this will not run and this will not be logged to the console. Next, I'll go on to else statements. So what if the condition inside your bracket is false? Well, you can always create an else statement to create a new path for the code to run. Let me give an example once more. So here I have a if statement for purchasing and consuming alcohol in Singapore, basically the legal restrictions, right? I write here, if age is greater than or equal to 18, then you can purchase and consume alcohol in Singapore. But what if I want the converse? What if it's false? Then I will have the statement, it's illegal for you to purchase or consume alcohol in Singapore, be logged to my console. So to give you an example of this, I'll now define age to be 17. So is this true? This is actually false because it is not true that 17 is greater than or equal to 18. So hence, the conditions is, since the condition is false, this entire block of code inside the if statement will not run. However, for the else statement, this will run because the condition inside if is false. That's why this entire block here is illegal for you to purchase or consume alcohol in Singapore. This block of code will run instead. But what if I want more? Well, you can do that using else if statements. This will allow you to create more scenarios with different conditions. Essentially, you're allowed to pick between more than two paths. So to give you an example of how this works, here's some code for how the A-level marking scheme is like, how the A-level grading scheme is like. So if my percentage is greater than or equal to 70, then I would gotten an A. However, what if it is not 70? What if this is false? Then I'll go to the next else if statement to check if percentage is greater than or equals to 60. This will be a B. But what if this is false again? Well, then I'll go to the next else if statement for percentage is greater than or equals to 55. This will be you got a C. And ultimately, if it's all false, then I will just go down to the last statement, which is this log statement that says you need to study harder. So to apply this with a real example for percentage, let me give you an example. I let percentage be equals to 64. So first one, is this true or false? The answer is it is false because it is not true that 64 is greater than or equals to 70. Thus, this will be ignored completely. We'll go to the next statement. Else if percentage is greater than or equals to 60. Is this true? The answer is this is true because 64 is greater than 60. So thus, whatever that's inside this curly brackets, these will run. Thus, you got to be this statement over here, it will be printed onto your console. So what happens to the remaining two? Well, JavaScript, since I already have a true condition, JavaScript will ignore the others because I only go to the others if my prevailing conditions were false. Hence, you got to see this will be ignored. You need to study harder. This will be ignored because I already have a true statement on the second else if percentage is equal to 60. That's why I've already printed you got a B. So JavaScript will exit this and it'll go on to the next block of code. Now we'll go on to logical operators. So logical operators, they allow you to consider multiple conditions. The first one is logical AND. It's represented by two AND symbols. What this means is if both of my operands being the things that come before and after my logical operator, if both of these are true, then it will evaluate to true. Else, if at least one operand is false, then it will evaluate to false. So let me give you an example. First case, if true and true, this is true because both of my operands are true. That's why here, this will evaluate to true. That's why what will be logged to the console is, this will always run. This will be logged to the console. Second case, if true and false. Now, this is false because not all of my operands are true. I require all of my operands in the logical AND operator to be true before the entire thing evaluates to true. Here I see a false, right? So thus, since at least one operand is false, this entire thing evaluates to false. That's why what will be logged to the console. Sorry, this will not be logged to the console at all. This entire statement here will not be logged to the console at all. Last case, more straightforward. If false and false. Well, obviously this is false because all of the operands are false. So thus, what this statement here will also not be logged to the console. So why is this useful? Well, it's useful if you want to check if multiple conditions are true, it's an if loop. So let me give you an example. Let's just say that I have two scores over here, and I want to check whether I pass both examinations. So I have math is equals to 80 and computing is equals to 75. So I need both scores to be above 50 for me to pass the exam. So what I can write is, if math score is greater than or equals to 50, and computing score is greater than or equals to 50. So let's check what it evaluates to. 80 is greater than 50, so this is true. This first part is true. 75 is also greater than 50, so this second part is true. So since both of my operands are true, what it will finally evaluate to is true. And that's why what will be logged here, that's why this if statement, this if block will run, and what will be logged to the console is you pass the examination. And since this part is true already, the else block will be ignored instead. The next operator, logical OR, what it does is that it will check if at least one of the operands is true. If at least one is true, it will evaluate to true. Else, if both of the operands are false, then it will evaluate to false. So, have some examples again. If true or true, since at least one is true, therefore this evaluates to true, and that's why this will always run. This will be logged to the console. That's the more straightforward example. The second example here, if true or false, a bit more tricky this time, but remember, logical OR operators check if at least one operand is true. Since I have a true over here, the entire statement immediately becomes true. And that's why this second block of code here will always run, and try what will be logged to the console is this will also always run. Third example, if false or false, this will evaluate to false. And the reason is because both operands are false. That's why it evaluates to false. Hence, this block of code will never run at all. So why do we use logical OR operators? It's useful if you want to check if at least one condition is true in an if loop. So that means at least one condition, one or more conditions are true in an if loop. Give you an example here. Let's just say I have the same example where I want to check whether my math score is greater than 50 and my computing score is greater than 50 to output, you pass at least one exam. Here, let me define my two variables. Math score is 90, computing score is 40. Well, let's evaluate. Math score is greater than 50. This is true because 90 is greater than 50. This first part is true. Second part here, computing score is false because 40 is not greater than 50. This part is false. So what does true or false evaluate to? Well, since at least one of my operators is true, therefore, true or false will evaluate to true. That's why this condition is true, and this if statement will run over here that says you pass at least one examination. So since this part is true, I will just ignore whatever that is inside the else statement. Next, I'll go on to logical NOT. So what logical NOT does is that it will reverse my logical state of the operand. So for example, if I have true and I apply the logical NOT operator, it will be not true will become false. Likewise, not false will also become true. So your logical NOT operator is represented by exclamation mark. To give you an example once more, I will create a variable is raining and I'll set it to the value of false. So now, it's raining is false, right? But now here I have an if statement that checks if not is raining. So the not of false here is true. That's why everything inside this bracket here evaluates to true. And hence, this if statement will run. So this statement, you do not need an umbrella, will be logged to the console. So basically just know that not true becomes false and not false becomes true. So you can think of this like a Venn diagram for and, or, and not. So and means that, okay, so let's consider peanut butter and jelly, right? If I want peanut butter and jelly, then I will only be taking the results that have both peanut butter as well as jelly inside. Only if both of them are true, then my final result will be true. For or, I only need to check if one of the results is true. So, for example, peanut butter or jelly means that as long as I have peanut butter, I have jelly, or even if I have both peanut butter and jelly, this will be still returned true. And then basically, such that whatever that's true now becomes false, or whatever that's false now becomes true. So with this, we'll now be at, oh, good timing. We'll now be at exercise 2. So please do open exercise 2.js in Visual Studio Code and complete exercise 2. So let me run through with you what is the goal of exercise 2. So the goal of exercise 2 is that imagine that you're running a cinema, right? You're given the age of a moviegoer. Well, if your age is less than 12, then, oh, sorry, let me just quickly change this to if your age is 12 or less. If your age is 12 or less, you will log the ticket price as $5 to the console. If your age is between 13 and 17, inclusive, meaning 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, you will log the ticket price as $8 to the console. And if your age is 18 and older, you will log the ticket price as $10 to the console. So I want you to use if statements to take the ages as arguments and then log the correct price to the console. Please do remember to change this part of the question. I realized that this part isn't correct during yesterday's run. Please change this to if the age is 12 or less to include the case where the age can be 12. So after you have done this, I'll give you all 5 minutes to attempt this exercise. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please do once again reach out to our facilitators wearing the lanyard. Or alternatively, you can also pump a message through Discord and our other facilitators online will assist you. All right, happy coding. I got food and then I have what they think that's now. How's it going in? Right, so your time is up for exercise 2. So let me just quickly run through the answers for how to do exercise 2. So as I mentioned in the question stem, you will use if statements to take the ages as arguments, and you will log the correct price to the console. So let's look at the first case here. If the age is 12 or less, log the ticket price as $5 to the console. So what I'll do is I'll use if, then I will insert my conditions. The conditions is age is 12 or less. So what I'll do is I'll write age is less than or equals to 12. This means that I will only be considering the ages that are 12 or less. After this, I will insert my curly brackets. So inside here is what will run if the age is indeed 12 or less. In this case, I want to log the ticket price as $5 to the console. So all I'll do is console.log $5 as a string. Next case, if the age is between 13 and 17 inclusive, so it's not 12 or less anymore. So what we can do is we can use an else if statement, right? And then inside this brackets, my condition is age is between 13 and 17. So how I can write this is I can write age is greater than or equals to 13, right? That's my first condition. My second condition is that, and I'll use the logical AND operator so that I must consider both conditions. Age is greater than or equals to 13, as well as age is less than or equals to 17. So this is the second part. After that, my curly brackets for the code block, I will log the ticket price as $8 to the console. So I will console.log $8. All right. So the last case, if the age is 18 or older, I could use an else if statement, but for simplicity, I'll just use an else statement. So inside the else statement, what I'll write is console.log in the string $10. So here are the three statements: if, else if, as well as else. So under do not modify, I set my age to be 15. So we expect that since 15 is between 13 and 17, what will be logged to the console is $8. And true enough, here as you can see, what will be logged to the console is $8. So this example shows you how you can use if, and else statements in order to consider different conditions and push the code into different blocks depending on what the condition that you want to fulfill is. Great. All right, so this comes to the end of exercise 2. So exercise 2 was on chapter 6. This is on Booleans. So now we'll be moving on to chapter 7, which is on strings. So this will be the last of the basic data types that you'll be learning. So what exactly are strings? So strings are basically sequences of characters. They are enclosed inside single quotes, which are this, or double quotes. So a property of strings is that if your string starts with a single quote, it must also end with a single quote. And if your string starts with a double quote, it must also end with a double quote. So for example, over here, building blocks as a string, it must include the double quotations. Also, I want you all to not see strings as just one word, but rather how individual characters are put together. For example, the capital B, capital B, small u, small I, these are all individual characters that are stringed together. And they're enclosed by quotes. They'll be important for later, but first let's go on to string concatenation. So what is string concatenation? It is basically using the plus operator to join multiple strings together, basically adding strings together. And the original strings are not changed. So to give you an example over here, I have word 1 equals to building, and word 2 is equals to blocks. So these are both strings. Now, what if I want to combine building and blocks together to get building blocks? What I can do is I can just do word 1 plus word 2. So this will append building and blocks together. I'll set this as the variable foo1, and thus if I log foo1 to the console, what will be returned to me is the string building blocks. Now, notice that when you combine two strings together, you don't have a space in the middle. So if you do want to add a space, refer to this second example where I do word3 plus, then after that I have a space that is inside the double quotation marks, then after that plus word4. So if I log, in this example here, December space conference, I set this as foo2. If I log foo2 to the console, what will be returned to me is December space conference. So now we are going into the plus equals operator once more. You can use this in order to append to an existing string. So let me give you an example. But before that, just a quick recap that x plus equals y is functionally equivalent to x equals x plus y. So again, a recap, evaluate everything on the right side and set it as a variable and set it as the value of the left side. So to give you an example here, I have the original name building. Now I want to append blocks to the end. So this is the same as writing name equals to building plus blocks. So I append building and blocks together. I set it as a variable name. Thus, if I log name to the console, what will be given is building blocks. Notice also that the original string is changed. My original string is building, and my new string after the appending is building blocks. So thus, do remember that if you use the plus equals operator, your original string will be changed. So just now I mentioned that strings are sequences of characters. I want to reinforce this point by introducing to you bracket notation. So strings are individual characters. So how do we tell where a specific character is? Well, we use this thing called an index. An index is a position of a character within a string. So a property of indexes that's quite confusing is that indexes are zero-based. What this means is that my first character has an index of 0, my second character has an index of 1, and so on and so forth. So let me give you an example with the word building blocks. Inside the word building blocks, as you can see, my first character here is in the capital letter B. This will have an index of 0. My second character, the small letter u, with an index of 1, and so on and so forth. Just follow the example all the way until the last character, which is the capital letter S, which has an index of 12. So why is this useful? Well, I can use square brackets in order to access the index of the character. Let me give you an example. I have the name building blocks over here, and I want to access the capital letter B. How do I do it? Well, I use name square bracket 0. So this refers to the index 0 on the first character. If I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is the capital letter B. Second example, similarly, name square bracket 1. This refers to the first index, so it's the second character. Thus, if I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is the small letter u. So what if I want to combine this with appending, with concatenating strings? Well, what I can do is, for example, if I want to get BBCS, right, from the string building blocks, I can literally access each individual character by counting the indices. So 0 refers to the capital B, 8 refers to the next capital B, 11 refers to the capital C, and 12 refers to the capital S. So if I use a plus operator to concatenate them all together, and I set this as the variable capitals, if I log capitals to the console, what will be returned to me is BBCS. Next, we'll go on to the dot length property. Dot length will tell you how many characters your string contains. Not to be confused with indices. In indices, we start counting from 0. But here for dot length, because we want to know how many characters there are, so therefore we can just start counting from 1. Let me give you an example. The same string building blocks. If I use dot length on building blocks, so I'll just do name dot length, this will return to me 13. And because it indeed is true that if you count the number of characters inside this string, it gives you 13. So how else can we use dot length? Well, we can use dot length in order to access the last character of the string. How do we do this? Well, we know that indexes are 0-based, whereas for dot length, I start counting the first character as 1. So in order to correct this, we have to put in name dot length minus away 1 in order to access the specific character. So for the last character, what I'll do is name, the name of the string. Inside the square brackets, I'll put name dot length minus away 1. If I log this to the console, what will return to me is the capital letter S, because this is indeed the last character of the string building blocks. Now I'll be going on to new lines. So you notice that strings are normally only just one line. How do I create multiple lines using a normal string? Well, I can do this using the /n. This will allow me to create a new line in strings. What this does is that at the exact point of /n, I will insert a line break at that point, and this is otherwise known as an escape sequence. It is in this example over here, if you can see, right, I have this long string, building blocks December conference 2025, JavaScript for Web Development Workshop. What if I want to break at a specific point? What I can do is if I want to break over here, I just add a /n. Now, if I log name, which is this long string here, it will actually come out as two separate lines. Building blocks December conference 2025 as one line, and JS for Web Development Workshop as the second line. So that's how you create new lines and strings. So what if, using the same concept of new escaping characters, what if you do need to include quotes within your string? Now, without escaping, JavaScript will think that you are trying to end your string. Let me give you an example over here, right? Here I have a string with a quotation mark. So for example, JavaScript is the best programming language, he said. If I have quotation marks inside my string, what JavaScript will think is, this first part is the string, these two quotation marks. This second mark is a string, the comma he said, second string. And everything inside here, JavaScript, this will not be treated as a string. So thus, if I run this, it will result in an error. So the question is, how do I solve this problem? How do I ensure that I can include the codes that I want within a string? Yes, that's one of them. But what if you want to include multiple? Like, for example, you want to have both double as well as single quotation marks inside your string. So the proper way to do this is to use escaping characters at the same time. You want to escape the inner quotes by using a / before them. So let me give you an example here. If you notice at every double quotation mark inside my string, right, I have put a /. So this means, this tells JavaScript that I don't want to end my string here. Continue on until you see a normal double quotation mark. That's why if I run this entire string over here, from the entire part from this quotation mark to this quotation mark, this will be treated as one string. So thus, if I log sentence to the console now, you notice that no errors are returned, and this entire string will be returned to me. Now, the next question, of course, is what if, since now JavaScript does not treat /s as characters to be displayed, how do I display /s if I want to do so? Well, the answer is, if you want to have a / in your string, you need to escape it by using another /. That means you need two / to display one /. Sounds confusing, but let me explain with this example over here. So we use /s often in file paths. So let's just say I have a variable path, with this string over here to access this specific file. Well, for each single / I want, I will actually put the first / to escape that character, then the second / which is to show that this is the exact character that I want to display. Thus, if I run console.log path, this will be returned to me, where now all of my /, instead of having two /, I only have one, because one of them is used to escape the next character. Next, I'll be going on to substrings. So what exactly are substrings? Substrings are sequences of characters that will appear in a larger string. So for example, in building blocks, the string, building as well as blocks, these are your substrings. So why are substrings important? Let me explain why. You can actually do a lot of methods with substrings. The first I'll be teaching you today is index of. What index of does is that it will search for a substring within a string, and it will return the index of the first occurrence of that string. Let me give you an example. Similarly, I'll let name equals to this string building blocks. Now, I want to find the index of blocks. Blocks is a substring, right? So what I can do is name.index of, inside the brackets, I'll put blocks. Then I'll set this as the variable position 1. So JavaScript will find from this string where the occurrence of this string blocks first occurs. What will be returned to me if I log position 1 to the console is 8. And the reason why it's 8 is because if you go and count the indexes, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 refers to the capital letter B in blocks. So this is the exact position where the first occurrence of blocks occurs. So as I mentioned, it returns the index of the first occurrence of your substring. If you look at this second string over here, I have two occurrences of building blocks. And if I want to perform the same method, but instead this time now finding building block, so sentence, dot index of with building blocks inside the parentheses. I set this as position 2. There'll only be one number returned to me, and that is 0, because I'm finding the first occurrence. The first occurrence will be at the start of the string, and that's why what will be returned to me is 0, which refers to the capital letter B in the first building blocks. Do also note that if you cannot find that occurrence in the string, then what will be returned to you is -1. So in this case, inside building blocks, I want to find JavaScript, or let this be position 3. If I log position 3 to the console, what's returned to me is -1, because my substring is not found. You can also specify where to begin searching by within a string if you declare a starting argument as a starting index as a second argument. So for example, in the previous example of sentence, building blocks is great, I love building blocks, right? Now, I want to only start searching from the middle of the string onwards. What I can do is, after the substring, I can put a comma and I can put a number. In this case, for example, I can put 20. So 20 here refers to the A in grade. So I'll only start searching from this point onwards. I'll let this be the variable position, and thus if I log position to the console, what's returned to me is 31. So 31 is actually this capital letter B over here if you count. So by putting a second argument, I'm able to select where I want to start searching from, which gives me a greater flexibility. So do also note that index of is case sensitive, just like many other methods in JavaScript strings. So for example, in this entire string, I don't have a capital letter C, but if I want to find a capital letter, if I want to find a small letter C, what will be returned to me is -1. So sentence.index of the small letter C, not a single small letter C inside here. I'll set this as position. If I log position to the console, -1 will be returned because I really cannot find a small letter C within this string. Next, I'll be going on to includes. So what includes does is that it will check if your string will contain a specific substring. And it will return a boolean. It will return true if your substring is found and false otherwise. Once again, examples. So let's just say I have a string building blocks December conference 2025. Then I want to find whether it includes building blocks. What I can do is name.includes. Instead of parentheses, I'll put building blocks. I'll set this as result1. So what is returned to me if I log result1 is true. It is true because there is indeed a substring building blocks within this string building blocks December conference 2025. Similarly, as index of, I can also put a second argument. So in this case, for example, 20. 20 will allow me to start searching from last E in December. Maybe I'll start searching from here onwards. Notice how there is not a single occurrence of building blocks after this letter E. So if I use name.includes building blocks 20, set this as result2, what will be returned is false because I do not have an occurrence of building blocks after this letter E because all I have is conference 2025. Last but not least, includes is also case sensitive. So in this case, if I want to find conference with a small letter C, but here conference is with a big letter C, so I use name.includes, I set this as result3. If I log result3 to the console, what will be returned is false because the method is case sensitive. So next I'll be going on to slice. So what slice does is that it will extract characters from your start index up to, but not including your end index. So the syntax, as you can see up here, I put it over here. The syntax is string.slice. Inside the brackets, I put start index as well as end index. So let me give you an example. Let name equals building blocks. So same example, right? Now, I want to use name.slice. Inside the parentheses, my start index is 0, my end index is 8. So what this does is that I will slice from index 0 to index 8, including 0, but not including 8. So let me give an example of what happens. If I do name.slice 0, 8, and I set this as the variable shorter name 1, if I log shorter name 1 to the console,
Bring too much content once.
wait, little in the slides. For break?
For them to absorb.
No, like let's do the exercise.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, let me continue. So, where was I? Oh yeah, name.slice 0 to 8. So include 0, but not include 8. This means that I will include this capital letter B, but not the up to, but not including this capital letter B. Effectively, I'm only slicing up to the small letter G. So with name.slice, inside I put 0 and 8. I'll set this as shorter name 1. if I log shorter name 1 to the console, what will be returned to me is just the string building. So if you don't have any end index, basically slice will extract to the end of the string. So for example, name.slice 8, I only have one argument. If I don't put an end index, basically slice will just extract everything from index 8, just capital B over here, to the end of the string. That's why if I do name.slice 8, I set this as variable shorter name 2. If I log shorter name 2 to the console, what will be returned to me is just blocks. So this I'll be going over to replace. So the syntax for replace is string.replace, search value, new value. So replace, as what its name suggests, it allows you to replace one string with another. So do also note that this method is case sensitive. So for example, if I have a string here, building blocks June conference 2025, and then after that I set this as the variable event. Now I want to replace all of my June with December. What I can do is I can do event.replace, and inside the brackets, June and December. So it will search for June and replace the June with December. And after that, I'll let this be take the variable event. So when I log event to the console, what will be returned is building blocks December conference 2025. So as I mentioned, the method is case sensitive. So imagine that we have let workshop equals to this string here, JavaScript for web development. If I do workshop.replace JavaScript, the small letter s, but in the original string, it was a capital letter S, this will not work. Okay. So even if I have, even if I want to replace JavaScript with Python, and I want to set this as the variable called workshop, if I were to log workshop to the console, you notice that JavaScript here will not be replaced because the cases here don't match. So what will be returned to me would still be JavaScript for web development. So do also note that in replace, only the first occurrence of a search value will be replaced. So in this example here, I have a sentence, building blocks June conference 2025 was held in June 2025. So I have two instances of June. Now, if I do sentence 1, which is this string, dot replace, and inside I have June and December, and I set this as a variable sentence 1, if I log sentence 1 to the console, what happens is that my June will be replaced with December for the first occurrence only. That's why if you read this new sentence, it is building blocks December conference 2025. So the first instance of June is replaced with December. Building blocks December conference 2025 was held in June 2025. So this second part didn't get changed. So how exactly do you go about this if you want to replace more than one occurrence? Well, you will use the replace all method. So let's just say that I have the same sentence here, sentence 2, right? With the same exact string. Now, if I want to replace all my Junes with Decembers, what I can do is sentence 2 dot replace all. And after that, the same thing, I'll put my search value and my new value. So this means that I'll replace all of the Junes with Decembers. Now, if I log sentence 2 to the console after running this, what will be returned to me is building blocks December conference 2025 was held in December 2025. So as you can see, all of my Junes have been replaced with December. So now it's time for another hands-on activity. Now we are going on to exercise 3. So open exercise 3.js inside Visual Studio Code and complete exercise 3. So first and foremost, now I will do a quick explanation of what exercise 3 is. So exercise 3, you're given a first name and a last name for William Shakespeare, and you're given a quote called "To be or not to be," that is a question from Hamlet, right? So your task in exercise 3 is as follows. You will first and foremost use bracket notation and string concatenation to store w.s from first name and last name in the variable called initials. So thereafter, you will log the variable initials into your console. After that, the third one, you will log the length of the variable quote into your console. After that, you will find the index of the first occurrence of the word question inside your variable called quote. And after that, you will store this as the variable question index. Last but not least, you will log the variable question index into your console. So this is exercise 3. I'll give you all 5 minutes to attempt this, and happy coding. And once again, if you need any like help, just feel free to raise your hand now. Facilities will come around to assist you. Wow. Right, so your time is up for exercise 3. So now I'll go over how to probably do exercise 3. So in the first part, I said use bracket notation and concatenation to store w dot space s dot in the variable initials. So let's first and foremost create the variable initials using let initials. After that, I said use bracket notation and concatenation. So the W comes from William. So what I'll do is equals to first name. Then I'll access the first character of William, the letter W. So use a square bracket, 0. So this has W already. Next, I want to put the dot, right? So what I can do is I can just use a dot and a space. After which I will put last name to get the S, right? Last name bracket 0. Then after that, I can just put another dot. So this will give me W dot space S dot. Next, I want to log the variable initials to the console. So I'll just do console.log initials. Next, I want to log the length of the variable quote to the console. So recall that you can use quote.length to get the length of quote. So our console.log quote.length. So what this does is that it will return the length of this entire quote over here. Next, I want to find the index of the first occurrence of the word question inside quote and store it as a variable. Oops, sorry, I realized I misspelled this. I want to find the index of the first occurrence of question in the variable quote and store it as a variable question index. So what I'll do is that I will do, I will let question index be equals to, then I will take quote, then I'll use index of, quote.index of. Then after that, inside the brackets, what I'll do is that I will put the word question. Last but not least, I want to log the variable question index into the console. So what I'll do is I will console.log question index. So ideally, what you should get is 42 and 33. As you can see over here, I'm able to output the initials, w.s. I'm able to output quote length, which is 42, and the first occurrence where question is 33 inside quote. So this is the answer for exercise 3. So now that we are done with exercise 3, this marks the end of chapter 7, which is on strings. So far we have covered all the basic data types inside JavaScript. Now we'll be going on to the more advanced parts, starting with chapter 8 on functions. So what exactly are functions? Well, functions are basically reusable blocks of code that will allow you to perform a task when they're being called. So it's a bit broad. Let me give you an example of what exactly functions are. So for functions, how we can define a function, how we can declare a function, is that we'll use the reserved word called function. So as you can see over here in my example, if I want to define a function, for example, output 1, the name of my function here is output 1. If I want to define a function, I'll use the reserved word function. After defining the function, after using function and defining the function name, what I'll do is that I will use a pair of round brackets. This will be parameters. I'll explain what parameters are later. After which, I'll put curly brackets, and whatever that's inside these curly brackets, this will be what will be run. Now, how do I call this function? Well, what I can do is that I can just call it by referencing the name followed by the curly brackets. So if I want to run the function output 1, what I can write in JavaScript is I can write output 1 to a pair of round brackets, then followed by a semicolon. What this does is that it will invoke output 1, and thus building blocks here will be logged into the console. So as mentioned just now, there's this thing called function parameters. But first and foremost, what's the difference between parameters as well as arguments? So for parameters, these are placeholders for values that will be passed to the function that is called. But for arguments, these are the actual values that are being passed. So let me give you an example here. I have a function output 2, and inside my brackets here, I have month and year. So these are parameters. These are the placeholders for the values that will be passed. Inside, where I actually call the argument here, where I actually call the function here called output 2, inside the brackets, I have December as well as 2025. So these are the actual values for what will be passed inside my function. So how we read this is that December, if I run the function like, sorry, if I run the function like this, December will take the value of month and 2025 take the value of year. So therefore, if I call this function as such, what will return to me is, it will log building blocks month we call is December, then conference, then year. We call that year is 2025. That's why the output will be building blocks December conference 2025. So to recap again, month and year, these are your parameters, these are your placeholders, whereas December and 2025, these are the actual values that are being passed into your function. Next, I'll be going on to return. So what return does is that this is the output of your function. It will allow you to set, return allows you to set whatever value that's being returned as a variable. Let me give you an example once again. I have a function here called sum. Sum here will take two numbers known as num1 and num2. What we return will be num1 plus num2. So all right, return num1 plus num2. So how does this work realistically? Well, if I call sum1, 2, so 1 will be num1, 2 will be num2. What we return will be 1 plus 2, which is 3. So whatever is returned here, it will take this value, sum1, 2. So this value here is 3. Now I want to set result as 3. And thus, if I log result to the console, what we log will be 3. So result will allow you to it's basically the output of your function, and you can allow you to set whatever the output of the function is as a variable. Next, I'll go on to default parameters. So default parameters is for a case where if your function is called without an argument for that parameter, the default value is being used. Let me give you an example here. Here I have a function known as event. Under event, I take one parameter known as month. The question is, what if I do not provide month? Well, if I don't provide month, then the default value here will be December. So how I define this is month equals December. What this function does is that it will log building blocks month conference. So in this case, building blocks, if nothing is being passed, it will log building blocks December conference. But if other values for month are being passed, then it will log other values. So to give you an example, if I call event with nothing inside the parentheses, what will be returned to me is building blocks December conference, because the default parameter will be invoked. Sorry, the default value will be used because I never passed anything into the argument. However, if I change, for example, to March and June, and I run this function, what happens is that it will log building blocks March conference and building blocks June conference respectively into the console. So there are other types of functions. You will see anonymous functions as well as arrow functions, but due to time constraints, I won't be going through this. Instead, just workshop speaker for React and Next.js for tomorrow, TechPy, she'll be going through anonymous as well as arrow functions for React and Next.js. In the meantime, though, let's go on to scopes. So what exactly are scopes? So scopes is basically the visibility and accessibility of variables inside your code. Basically, the fundamental question that you should be asking yourself is, where can my variables be accessed or modified? So fundamentally, there are three scopes available. There's your global scope, the local scope, as well as your block scope. Okay, so this example will be rather confusing. So let me run through it slowly with you all. A global scope is a variable that is accessible from anywhere inside your code. So let me give you an example here. I have defined a variable called a global that takes the value of the string global. This is a global scope because my variable is defined outside any functions or any blocks. So thus, this variable will be accessible from anywhere inside my code. Now, if I log global here, this line is in the global scope because it's outside functions and blocks. So thus, I am able to return global onto the console. That's why global can be output. Now, what happens if I want to access global inside a function? This over here will be a local scope because local scopes are accessible within a function. Am I able to do it? The answer is still yes. I can access a global variable from within a local scope. Here, this function, what I want to do, this function called print global, what I want to do is I want to log global, the variable, to the console. Thus, if I run the function print global, it will still be able to output global because I'm accessing a global variable from a local scope. So thus, this will have no issues. Now let's go on to the local scope. So local scope is accessible from within a function. Let me define a variable called local within a function. Local will take the value of local. So this is a local scope because it's inside the function. Can I access local from within the same function? The answer is yes, because they are in the same scope. So if I want to have a log local here, it's okay. If I call this function called print local, it will run normally because I'm over here, I'm trying to access a local variable from a local scope. So this is fine. Thus, print local here will be able to print local. But what if I want to now run console.log local in the global scope? Will it work? The answer is no, it will not work. Why? Because this console.log statement is actually in the global scope. While my variable is called local was defined inside the local scope. I cannot access a local variable from a global scope. Thus, if I run console.log local, it will result in an error. Next, I'll be going on to block scopes. So block scopes are things that are accessible within your within your curly brackets, not including functions. For example, in if statements. So inside this function now, I want to throw in an if statement that says if true, so it will always run, right? I'll define let the block equals block. So this is a blocks variable in a block scope that has a value block. Now, if I want to log block, this is okay because both of these are inside the block scope. So thus, if I call this function here print block, it's okay because both of these are in the block scope. So everything runs fine. Now, what happens if I want to access block from the local scope? This over here is in the local scope, right? Because it's inside the function, but it's not inside the if block. So what happens here is that an error will be written because I'm trying to access a block variable from a local scope, which is not possible. Last but not least, I also have console.log block. This is in the global scope now. This will also result in an error because I cannot access a block variable from the global scope. So now the next question you might be asking is, what if I want to define variables of the same name in different scopes? The answer is that you can. For example, in this same code block, right? Sorry, in this same code, right? I have two instances of block. So one is in the block scope, one is in the global scope. Now, if I log block to the console, what will be returned to me here is possible to return block over here. Because now I have defined, even though they are the same name, they are in different scopes, and thus this is completely possible. Thus, if I log block to the console, here it can return block. All right, so now we'll go on to exercise 4 in VS Code. This is regarding functions. So let me quickly run through with you what does exercise 4 entail. So exercise 4, your job is to create two functions. The first function that you'll create is called total cost. What total cost does is that it'll take in two parameters known as item price as well as quantity. And this function will calculate the total cost of the items. All right. The second function that you'll create is called apply discount. What it does is that it will take in two parameters known as total amount as well as discount rate. And this function will apply a discount to your total amount and return the final amount after discount. So what I provided you with? I provided you with these 4 lines of code. So this is the total cost function that you need to declare. 50 here, the first parameter, refers to the item price, and 3 refers to the quantity. So you'll set this as total, and if you log total, you should get 150. Next, the second function is apply discount. You will take total as well as 0.1. Total comes from earlier, and 0.1 here refers to your 10% discount rate. You set this as final amount, and if you log final amount to the console, you should get 135. So this is the task for exercise 4. So now I'll give you all about 5 minutes to try to code this out, and after 5 minutes, I'll go through the answers. Once again, if you have any questions, please do raise your hand and our facilities will come over to assist you. China, bro. You see that? After GS, I still got another 3 hours with them. No, like, I still sure. GS is the harder one.
Yeah.
But he's doing that.
Yeah, he's doing
Yeah. Bye. All right, your time is up for exercise 4. So now I'll be going through the answers for exercise 4. So your task here was to create 2 functions, right? First one is called total cost, and the other one is called apply discount. So let's attempt the first part first. We're going to create a function total cost. My 2 parameters are item price as well as quantity. So to define a function, I'll just do function. After function, I have the name of my function. In this case, it is total cost. Now inside, I want to have two parameters, item price and quantity. How I can do this is I can put item price. After that, I can put quantity. These are my two parameters. After this, I can put curly brackets. And inside these curly brackets, I'll be writing my code. So what do I want? I want to calculate the total cost of the items. So how do I do that? Well, for each item, it's $50, and I have 3 of them. So the total price will be 50 times 3, which is 150. So I will return item price times the quantity. So in this case, 50 is the item price, 3 is the quantity. It will return 50 times 3, which is 150. So the first part is done. The second part, I need to create a function called apply discount that takes in two parameters, total amount and discount rate. So same logic function, apply discount. Inside my two parameters are total amount and discount rate. So total amount as well as discount rate. Curly brackets again to define the function body. After that, I want to apply a discount to the total amount and return the final amount. So what I can do is I can do return, and do note that 0.1 is 10% discount, which means that if I were to sell this product, if I were to buy this product, I will be paying 90% of the cost. So how can we do this? Well, we can first and foremost define what is the discounted amount. In this case, the discounted amount will be the total amount times the discount rate. But as I mentioned, this is the discounted amount. How do I get the final amount? Well, I can just take the total amount subtracted away from the total amount minus the type of discount rate. So what happens is that here, this will be 150 times 10%, which is $15. Then after that, I'll return 150 minus 15, which should be 135. Hence, when I run the code, my two outputs are 150 and 135, which is exactly as what I have defined over here, 150 and 135. So this comes to the end of exercise 4. So in this chapter, on chapter 8, you've learned about functions. Next, I'll be going on to chapter 9, which is on arrays. So what exactly are arrays? Arrays are known as ordered collections of values. So there are some similarities with arrays as well as strings. Inside arrays, each value has a numeric index, and array indexes are also zero-based, meaning that they start from 0 and go up so on and so forth. Now, values inside an array can be of different data types. For example, numbers, strings, as well as booleans. Your arrays are created using square brackets, as I'll demonstrate later. Your values are separated with commas. And one property of arrays is that they are dynamic. After you create an array, you are able to change the size of an array. So a lot of words here, but let me illustrate what this does using code. So what this means using code. So first and foremost, on indexing and length, as I mentioned just now, arrays are zero index. So the first element index will be 0. So in this example over here, I have a array, 3 elements, a string Python, a string C++, and a string JavaScript. They are in the variable languages. Now, what if I want to access the first element, Python? What I can do is languages, then after that, the square bracket followed by 0, because the first element index is 0. If I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is Python. Similarly, I can do the same for JavaScript by using languages, square bracket, 2. If I log this to the console, what will be returned to me is JavaScript, because this is at index 2 or the third element inside my array. Next property that I'll be introducing to you is .length. So .length will allow you to return the number of elements inside your array. In this case, languages has 3 elements, Python, C++, and JavaScript. So if I log languages.length, I'm able to return the number of elements in my array, which is 3. Next, I'll go on to editing arrays. So you can actually edit your arrays whenever you want to, because as I mentioned just now, they are dynamic. So you can update an element by assigning a new value to that specific index. Let me give you an example. I already have an array with 3 elements, Python, C++, and JavaScript. What if I want to change the element of C++ to C? How I can do this is I can write languages, and inside a square bracket, I will use 1. 1, because now I want to access the second element with index 1. So languages 1, or let this be C. This will replace C++ with C. So that's when I log languages to the console, what will be returned to me is Python, C, JavaScript. So that's on updating elements. Now, how do I add new elements to my array? Well, I can do so by assigning a value to that specific index using the same logic. In this case, if you notice, I only have 3 elements in my array. So the greatest index here is 2. Now I want to add index 3. How do I do so? Well, I can just put languages, and then in the square bracket, I can put 3. So languages 3 is equals to, for example, Go. Now, if this will add Go into the array. So if I use console.log languages, now you'll see that there are 4 elements: Python, C, JavaScript, as well as a new element there called Go. Next, I'll be going on to push and pop. So what these are methods that allow you to modify your array as well. So push will allow you to add elements to the end of your array, and you are able to return the new length of the array. What do I mean by this? Let's see. I have languages here, again, Python, C++, and JavaScript. Okay, so my apologies, I should have put a let in front of the length and last, but so just assume that there's a let, okay? So here now I want to use .push in order to add elements to the end of the array. Let's just say I want to add C and C# to the end of this array. What I can do is languages.push C and C#. So now if I log languages to the console, what will be returned to me is Python, C++, JavaScript from earlier, together with C and C# now. As I mentioned, the output of this will return the new length of the array. So the new length of the array is 5, because just now I had 3 elements, now I add 2 more. So thus, over here, length, right? If I log length to the console, the answer now will be 5. So next, I'll go on to pop. So pop will allow you to remove the last element of your array, and it will return that element. What do I mean by this? Another example. So now I have an array with 5 elements, right? Now let's just say I do languages.pop. What this does is that I'll remove the last element of my array. In this case, I'm removing C#. If I log languages now, I will only have 4 elements left: Python, C++, JavaScript, and C. C# is no longer there because I've removed the last element from my array. I will set this to the variable last, and now if I set last to be languages.pop, it will return the element that was deleted. In this case, C#. That's why when I log last to the console, what is returned to me is C#. Now here's a bit more confusing things. Here are 1-dimensional and 2-dimensional arrays. So a 1-dimensional array is what you've been doing previously. It is a single row of elements, and you notice that you access it using only 1 index, basically 1 number. For example, over here, languages 2. For a 2-dimensional array, think of this as an array of arrays. You now have multiple rows and columns of elements, and you will have to access this array using 2 indices. So for example, over here, right, this is a 2D array, basically an array that contains more arrays. So what I'm trying to explain to you here is that inside your arrays can also contain more arrays. So 1D array, not much that I can add on, but let me bring you to the example of 2D arrays. So how exactly do you access an element in a 2D array? Let's just say that I want to find the number 2. I want to access the element called 2. How do I do this? Well, first and foremost, the array here is called grid. Next, let's go from the big array, let's go into smaller and smaller parts. In this one array, I have 2 arrays. You notice that the value 2 is found in the second array. And the second array will have an index of 1. So thus, the first index that I will use is 1. Because I will, from like a larger array, I want to work inwards, I will see that this, what is in the index 1 is this array over here. Now, let's go a bit more specific. Let's really find the value 2. Then we can use a second index in order to consider just this array only. As you can see, 2 is the first in the first index of this array. So hence, my second index here will be 0. That's why if I log grid 1, 0, it will find the second array and the first element. Thus, it will be able to return 2. Next, I'll be going on to array destructuring. You will see this again inside React Next.js, and okay, I'm not sure about Animation.js, but definitely in React and Next.js, you'll see array destructuring. what this does is that you extract your values from your arrays and assign them to variables. Let me give you an example. The same example with Python, C++, and JavaScript as languages. What if I want to destructure my entire array such that I want to assign each of them as individual strings? Well, what I can do is I can use a let keyword. Then I can put whatever new variables I want to define inside square brackets. This tells JavaScript that I'm destructuring an array. What's on the right will be the original array. So first will be Python, second will be C++, third will be JavaScript. Thus, when I log all of them to the console, first, second, and third, what will be returned to me is Python, C++, and JavaScript in that order. The next question you might be asking is, what if I want to skip some unimportant elements using commas? Let me give you a second example there. I'll let months be March, June, and December. What if I think that maybe June is not important? I only want to export March and December. What I can do is I can give first month to March and third month to December, but for the space that I would assign June to a variable, I'll just leave it blank. So I can basically skip over that element using a comma. So thus, if I log first month and third month to the console, it will return March and December respectively. So what if the array has fewer elements than the targeted array that you want to destructure? Well, let's look at this example over here, where I also incorporate default values. If your array has fewer elements than the number of variables that you want to assign. This example over here, same, Python, C++, JavaScript. Now, I only have 3 elements here, but I want to have 4 variables. What can I do? I can use a default value over here. This means that if my array here does not have a 4 value, the variable 4 will just take the value of C. So in this example, languages has 3 elements. First will be Python, second will be C++, third will be JavaScript. I don't have a 4th, so 4th will just be C because it's a default value. So thus, if I were to log first, second, third, fourth, all of them, it will give me Python, C++, JavaScript, as well as C, respectively. Another thing that you can do with destructuring is to use rest. What rest means is that it will select all of your elements that have not been destructured, and it will put them into a new array known as rest. Do note that you don't have to use rest, you can use another variable name. You'll see this in the exercise later. Same example here, 3 elements, Python, C++, and JavaScript. What if I want to just extract Python and I want to leave C++ and JavaScript in another array? I can do this by putting ..rest over here. So first will be Python, and .rest will refer to everything else that has not been destructured. So in this case, C++ and JavaScript. I'll put inside square brackets, and I'll let this be equal to the array languages. So if you log first to the console, it will return Python. And if you log rest to the console, it will return all of the remaining elements, which is C++ as well as JavaScript in an array. The next part is a bit simpler, reverse. Basically, as the name implies, it just reverses your array. It will modify your array, your original array, and it does not create a new array. So what do I mean by this? Let's just say I have the same array, Python, C++, and JavaScript as languages. If I use languages.reverse, I'm flipping the order of the array. Thus, if I log languages to the console, you notice that now the order is JavaScript, C++, and Python, which is the exact opposite of the original array. Next, I'll be going on to split. So in split, this is where I'll combine my knowledge of strings together with arrays. Here, I want to divide a string into an array of substrings. In split, you're able to specify where each split should happen, be it at characters, at spaces, or at dashes. Example time again, I have name1, which is a string called building blocks. Now, what if I want to split them all by individual characters and put them as an array? Well, I can do this using name1, which is building blocks, dot split. Now, from here, inside the parentheses, what I'll put is double quotation marks. This indicates to JavaScript that I am splitting by characters. Thus, if I log array1 now to the console, you see that all of the elements are the letters that spell out building blocks in an array. You can also specify spaces. For example, here, in this second example, building blocks December conference, there are 2 spaces, right? If I want to split by spaces, I can just use name2, which is this string, dot split. inside the brackets, I can put a space in between my double quotation marks. This means that JavaScript will now split by spaces. I'll set this as array2. When I log array2 to the console, what will be returned to me is building blocks, December, and conference. These 3 elements inside one array. So join is the exact opposite of split. Basically, I'm combining all of my characters inside my array into a single string. So for example, in this array here, this was what I obtained just now. All the individual letters that spell out building blocks. And let this be array. Now, if I want to join all of them together, I'll just use array.join. And I'll set this as name. And if I log name to the console, I'll be able to get the string building blocks returned to me. So for the next part is on index of. This is similar to strings. I won't go through this into detail, but do note that you can also do this in arrays. Essentially, you are finding the first index of an element within an array. So the examples are pretty much the same as in strings. So there's honestly nothing new, just that remember in strings, you're finding specific characters, and now in arrays, you're finding specific elements. So I won't go through the examples. I think the examples are pretty self-explanatory. But if you have any other questions for the examples, of course, later you can raise your hand and a facilitator will come by, or you can pop it through Discord. So I will be skipping the examples for index of. Includes also, just now we've seen this in strings, but now I will check whether an array contains a specific value. If it contains a specific value, I'll return true. And if it does not contain a specific value, I'll return false. So once again, similar to strings, I will be going through the examples. The comments there, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. Slice also, I won't be going through this, but for the case of arrays, slice will allow you to extract elements from start index up to end index. And once again, if there's no end index, it will just extract all the way to the end of the array. So I also won't be going into this. The examples, I think, are also pretty self-explanatory, including the comments. What I will be going through, however, is concat, because you have not seen this in strings yet. So what concat does is that it will merge 2 or more arrays of values, and it will return a new array. Do note that your original array will not be modified. Let me give an example here. I have 2 arrays here, languages 1 with Python and JavaScript, and languages 2 with C++ and C. So how do I combine these 2 arrays together? Well, what I can do is languages 1, then I'll use dot concat. Inside the parentheses of concat, I'll put in the array that I want to merge. In this case, I want to merge with languages 2. What this does is that I will be merging the 2 arrays. I'll set this to result 1. Thus, if I log result 1, what will be returned to me is Python, JavaScript, C++, and C, which are my arrays languages 1 and languages 2 merged together. Second example here, you can actually also merge individual elements. In this case, I have individual elements, Java, as well as C#. So over here, I have result1.concat, and inside here, I just have 2 basic strings. These are not arrays because they don't have any square brackets. I'll set this to be result2. Thus, if I log result2 to the console, do remember that just now result1 was 4 elements. Now, if I log result2 to the console, I will have additional Java as well as C# being added to the end of result1. Thus, I have an array now with 6 elements, Python, JavaScript, C++, C from here, as well as a new Java and C#. All right, so now we have reached the end of chapter 9 on arrays. Now it's time to do a hands-on activity for exercise 5. So let me run you through what is the goal of exercise 5. So the goal of exercise 5 is as shown. I have given you an array called phonetics with 4 elements, alpha, bravo, Charlie, and delta. So here's your task. First and foremost, you're going to log the first element of the array phonetics to the console. So the first array is alpha. So you use bracket notation for that. Secondly, you use dot length to log the last element of the array phonetics to the console. So just a hint, I covered this also in strings. So you'll use dot length in order to return delta. All right. Next, you replace the third element of the array phonetics, which is Charlie here. You will replace Charlie with echo. After that, you will log this updated array to the console. And after that, you'll practice array destructuring. So you use array destructuring to assign the first 2 elements of the array phonetics, in this case, alpha and bravo, into the variables first and second respectively. So first should be alpha, second should be bravo. Now, the rest of the elements, the rest of the array phonetics, you want it to be in the array others. Last but not least, you will log the variables first and second and the array others into the console. So once again, I'll give you all about 5 minutes to try to attempt this entire exercise. And if you have any questions, do raise your hand, and our facilities wearing the BBCS lanyard will help to answer your queries. Hold up. Yeah. Common calculation.
What is this?
What? What's something like everyone coming here? Is it because you all saw that also great? Like exercise.
Yeah.
Suddenly everyone just come in. Like everyone just came in.
No, me and Zoo just came in because we were watching a stream and like, okay, just need to stretch my legs.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, it was okay. So there are people that actually know what's going on. So that helps.
Another, see, I have another, what's this, 1 hour. So 1 hour. Then another 3 hours. 1 hour break. Oh, yeah. I think should be playing. 1 hour can actually eat 5. And, yeah. It's it was either something or like events. It was
like scheduling for the first thing. It also has 2 days. So like today will be just that was tomorrow will be SQL. We said like oh he can't make it tomorrow, so we had to switch this. Oh,
我们希望数学哎，哇，
He's a 2x, like a 10x engine. He's a 2x photographer.
All right, so your time is up for exercise 5. Okay, so your time is up for exercise 5. So now I'll be going through the answers for exercise 5. Okay, so in exercise 5, you have been given the following task. So first and foremost, you have to log the first element of the array phonetics to the console. So how you can do this is just simply console.log phonetics, and the first element has an index of 0. Next, I said you must use .length to log the last element of the array to the console. So how exactly do you do this? Well, what you can do is you can do console.log, then you will access the array phonetics. Now, inside this square bracket is where I want you to use your .length property. So if you do phonetics.length, here phonetics.length is 4, but you want to access the last element, which is index 3. So how do you account for that? You just need to put phonetics.length minus away 1. So when you do this, this will just be 4 minus 1. So it will access phonetics at the third index, which is delta, which is indeed your last element of the array. Next, I will go on to the next step, which is to replace the third element of phonetics with echo. So the third element will have an index of 2. So what I will do is phonetics 2, and I'll let this take the value of echo. So now the third element will no longer be Charlie, it will now be echo. Then I am told to log the updated array to the console. So I will do console.log phonetics. Oops, sorry, phonetics like this. So that clears the first 3 lines. The fourth line now says to use array destructuring to assign the first 2 elements of the array phonetics to the variables first and second respectively, and all others will go to the array others. So let's recap on how to do this. So to define my variables, I'll use let. And to tell JavaScript that I want to do array destructuring, I must ensure that all of my new variables are embedded inside the square brackets. So I want to assign the first element as the variable first. So first will be alpha, second will be bravo. Then all of my other elements will now be inside an array called others. So if you all recall, I can just use the 3 dots. So ... others. And I'll let this be equals to phonetics. So let me recap again. First will be alpha, second will be bravo. Everything else will be go into others, so which will be echo and delta. These will go into others. Now, the last part is just to log your variables, first, second, as well as others. So I just do console.log first, console.log second, and lastly console.log third. If I save this, and I run this, not third, console.log others. My apologies. With console.log others, after you run this, you'll be able to get the following results. First and foremost, log the first element of the array phonetics to the console. First element is alpha. Secondly, using .length, log the last element of phonetics to the console. It will be delta. Then after that, I replace the third element of phonetics, which is Charlie, with echo, and then log the new array. So what is returned to me is alpha, bravo, echo, delta, where Charlie is replaced with echo. After that, I use array destructuring. I destructure into the individual variables. So I log first, second, and others. So first will be alpha, second will be bravo, and others will be echo and delta. So that is the solution for how to solve exercise 5. So this comes to the end of chapter 9 on arrays. So we still have a few more chapters to go. So due to time constraints, as I have previously learned from my experience with group 1 yesterday, from here onwards, I will not be going through the exercises. I won't also be explaining the exercises. What will happen is that you'll have the exercises, but you don't have the answers. So at your own free time, you can just try out the exercises. And at the end of today, I will send out my copy of the slides with all of the solutions as well as the explanations written in either bullet points or the comments. So if you all have any questions about the exercises, do feel free to refer to the slides in order to get the answers and the explanations. So let's go on to chapter 10, which is on objects. So what exactly are objects? So objects are a data structure that is made up of specific properties. So what exactly is a property now? Well, a property consists of a key as well as a value. Let me give an example with this object over here. So an object is actually basically key and values that are surrounded inside curly brackets. So what's on the left of the colon over here, right? What's on the left is a key, and what's on the right is a value. So here, the property of organization is building blocks. Property of month is December, property of type is conference, and property of year is 2025. So with all of these properties, how do I actually access the data? Well, what I can use is dot notation. So, for example, if I want to access building blocks, here I will use the dot notation to find event, which is the name of my object, dot organization. So organization is my property. So if I log event dot organization, what will return to me is building blocks, because I am trying to print this to the console. So you have properties, but how do you create them? Well, you can create properties using the dot notation as well. You have to define a key, and after the equal sign, you define a value. So let me give you an example. Here, event, I have 4 properties, right? Now let's just say I want to create a 5th property called theme. So what I'll do is event.theme. So the name of the object dot the property. After the equal sign, I will put in the value. In this case, since the theme is web development, let's just put web development as the value. So event.theme is equal to web development. Now, originally I have 4 properties. Now, if I lock the new event to the console, I will have 5 properties with the new property that I've created called event. Sorry, with the new property that I've created called theme over here. As you can see, theme has a value of web development. So you can create properties, but you should also be able to remove properties. You can do so using the delete operator. What this does is that it will delete the property that you have defined using dot notation. Example, the same object here, event, with 4 properties, right? Let's just say I want to delete year. How do I do this? I can use the delete operator. After this, I can put the property at the back using dot notation. So the object name dot the property key. Sorry, the property key. Now, after I delete event.year, there should be no more year, right? Plus, if I try to log event.year, you realize that it just says undefined because this property does not exist anymore. And if I log event to the console, the entire object, you realize that there are only 3 properties left: organization, month, as well as type. So year does not evolve. Year is not there anymore because we have deleted it. So how exactly do you check for properties inside an object? Well, you can use 2 methods, either has own property or in. This will allow you to check whether your object is a specified property. So let me run through both as examples. First and foremost, let's just say I want to check whether this object over here has the property organization. What I can do is I can use event.hasOwnProperty. So event is the name of my object. Event.hasOwnProperty. Inside my parentheses, I will put organization. If I log this to the console, it will return true. And it is true because inside my object called event, I do have a property called organization. So that's the first method. The second method would be to use in. How you can do this is, let's just say I want to check whether month exists inside the object event. What I can do is month in event. So I'll be checking whether the month property is inside the object called event. So if I log this to the console, it will also return true. And it is true because there is indeed a month inside event. A month property inside event. So in just now I introduced to you 1D and 2D arrays. So you can nest arrays inside arrays. In JavaScript, you can also nest objects inside objects. And how you will access more specific properties is that you use a dot notation. So you can use the dot notation multiple times to access even more specific elements. In this example here, I have months, which is a nested object inside the larger object events. So months here has the properties 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So let's just say, how do I want to access December? What I can do is, I can, same as using 2D arrays, we'll work from a larger object and we'll work our way down to a smaller element. So in this case, events, I have events. Then that's the large object, right? Now I want to go to a smaller property. The next level will be months. So I'll do events.months. So but events.months is still an object. How do I get December? What I can do is events.months.third. So now I'll be using two dot notations in order to get to the element that I want, which is over here. It's called December. So you can use dot notations as many times as you want in order to get more specific elements if there are many layers of nesting inside one object. So it's also possible to create functions and objects where your key, it's possible to create a property where your value is a function within an object. And likewise, the function can be called using dot notation. In this case, I have a key here called purpose, and my value here is a function that returns this entire string. So if I want to call this function, what I can do is I can use event.purpose, because in the event object, I have the property purpose. So using event.purpose, and of course, because it's a function, I'll have my two round brackets at the end, call it event.purpose. And if I log it to the console, what will be returned to me is describes the event that's taking place now, which is indeed what has been returned inside the function on top. Next, I'll be going on to the this keyword. So this in JavaScript refers to the object itself. Why is this important? Because you're able to access the object's properties from within itself. In previous examples, I've accessed the object's property from outside the object, but now what if I want to access the object's properties from within the object? So let's build on to our concept of functions from just now. Let's just say that I have a function here called print, and I want it to return the properties that are inside event. What I can do is I can use this keyword. In this case, return this dot organization, this dot month, this dot type, and this dot year, all with the appropriate spacing. So what this does is that this organization is building blocks. This dot month is December. This dot type is conference. This dot year is 2025. So what happens when I try to run event.print? So if I log event.print to the console, what this does is that this will be returned, which is building blocks December conference 2025. So let's go on next for how to use functions to create objects. In JavaScript, this is known as an object constructor. So it's a function used to create objects. And if you want to create a new object, you use the reserved word called new to create the function. For the function, you input all of the properties that you want inside the round brackets. So link back to functions and link back to the this keyword. In this function over here, I have a function with the name of event. I take in three parameters known as month, year, and theme. Over here, I want to use the this keyword. So that means that this dot month equals month means that the property month in the new object that I'm going to create will take the value of month that comes in my parameter. And the same logic applies for year and theme as well. So this function over here, what it does is that it will create an object with three properties, month, year, and theme. So how exactly do I create a new object? Well, what I can do is I can use a new keyword. So I'll let event1 be the variable that stores this object. I will use new event, December 2025 at web development. So December is the month, 2025 is the year, and web development is the theme. So in doing this, what happens is that it will assign for this event1, event1.month will be December. Event1.year will be 2025, and event1.theme will be web development. That's why when I log event1.month, year, and theme respectively, what will be returned to me will be December 2025 as well as web development. Same concept as array restructuring. This time for objects, you can extract the values from objects and assign them to variables. However, unlike arrays, in this case, you'll notice that when I define my variables, right, instead of using square brackets, I'll use curly brackets because these are now I'm doing object restructuring, not array restructuring. So same concept, same object with organization, month, type, and year. Now I want to split them all into the individual variables. So what I'll do is I'll let enter the curly brackets. I'll define four variables: organization, month, type, and year. I'll let this be event, which is this object over here. So if I just log them as basic variables, so I don't use the dot notation because I'm not accessing objects, I'm just accessing variables. In this case, what will be returned to me when I log organization month type in here is building blocks, December, conference, and 2025 respectively. So as I mentioned just now, I won't be going into exercise 6. I'll be uploading the answers. You can try it for yourself, and I'll be uploading the answers when I upload my version of the slides. Debugging techniques, I will reserve this for later because it's possible for me to go on to the next part of the lecture of the workshop without going through this. So I'll just quickly skip over this. I'll come back to this when I have time. In the meanwhile, let's go on to chapter 12, which is on loops, which I think is a more fundamental concept to understand. So what are loops? Loops are basically used to repeat a block of code multiple times. So the next slide will show you the anatomy of a for loop. So basically how a for loop will look like. So give me a while as I try to explain what everything in here means. So inside a for loop, you are using this to basically repeat a block of code multiple times. But first question is, how do you know how many times your code has been repeated? Well, the answer is you will use this thing called a counter variable. How you will use a counter variable is how you will initialize your counter variable is at the first parameter, known as initialization. This initialization is executed before your code starts. Typically, we use a counter variable to keep track of how many times my loop has been executed. So that's the first part. The second part would be condition. A condition is evaluated before each iteration of the loop, meaning each time that the loop runs. If the condition will be true, my code block will be executed. But if my condition is false, then I will move on to the next block of code. Last but not least, it will be a change. Change here is used to increment or decrement the counter variable, meaning to increase or decrease the counter variable. It's executed after each iteration of the loop, meaning that once I hit the ending curly bracket, that change will occur. So, unlike other, like for example, functions or arrays or objects, here, how we separate our values is using a semicolon. Oh, and then whatever that's inside the curly bracket, this will be your code. So let me give you an example of a for loop. Here is a for loop that will print all single-digit, non-negative integers in ascending order. That means from 0 to 9. So let's go through the parameters again. First and foremost, initialization. I have to create an initialization variable in order to keep track of how many times my loop has been run. In this case, I'll use I. So I will put let I equals 0. Next, my condition. This is the condition that will only run if my loop will only run if the condition is true. In this case, my loop can only run when I is less than 10. If I is equal to 10 or more than 10, is false and I escape the loop completely. After that, I++. Okay, just now I didn't explain what plus plus is. But think about plus plus as incrementing I by 1, meaning increasing the value of I by 1. This means at the end of the loop, plus will happen, and I'll increase I by 1. So how this loop works is as such. I initialize with I equals 0. Then I log I, so I'm logging 0. So now I've hit the end of the code block, right? My change will occur, my I will increase to 1. Then my loop will happen again. So I will log 1 to the console now. Then I hit the end of the code block, my change will happen, I becomes increased. I increases from 1 to 2. So then I will log 2, and the cycle will, as you can see, the cycle will just repeat and continue onwards. Now, how does the loop stop? Well, the loop can stop if this condition is false. If I is equals to 10, or if I is greater than 10, my loop will stop, and I will exit this entire for loop completely. In this case, I have I equals to 9. When I have I equals to 9, right, I log 9 to the console. After that, I++ happens, 9 gets increased to 10. Then we check our condition. Our condition says that I must be less than 10. So now I is equal to 10. So this condition here is false. So what happens is that I will exit this loop and my for loop will end. Which is why this entire for loop will be able to print my single digit non-negative integers in ascending order from 0 to 9. So there's another type of loop called a while loop. So a while loop will run as long as the condition is true. The condition here is written inside your round brackets. Let me give you an example. The same example, but now with a while loop. So let's just say I create a variable called let count is equal to 0. Then I create a while loop. Inside the brackets, I have this condition here, count is less than 10. This means that if the condition is true, whatever that's inside the curly brackets will run. And if it's false, then I'll exit the while loop completely. So here, inside my code, console.log count means that I'll output what is count. Then I'll do count plus plus, which means that I will increment the value of count by 1. So in this case, this is the same example. It will output single-digit integers in ascending order of separate lines. So when count is, let's just say count is 0, right? I will output 0, then count will increase to 1. Then I'll go back to the start of the loop again, where I'll output 1, then I'll increase count to 2, and so on and so forth. This will keep happening. And eventually, when count is 9, I output 9. Then after that, I increase my count to 10. In this case, my count will be false. Sorry, my condition here will be false already. And the reason is because now count is no longer less than 10. Count is equal to 10. Since my condition is false, I'll exit the while loop completely. So next, I'll be going on to do while. So there's a difference between while as well as do while. In do while, you will execute the code block at least once inside do before I check whether the condition is true inside while. With the same example over here, if you look at this example over here, the first one, is exact same as me writing, as me just using a while loop from the previous example. So except that I have moved whatever code block that I want inside do, and inside these curly brackets over here. And the condition is put inside while, and inside these round brackets over here after the do. The second example is what I want to bring attention to. Here I put while false, right? So false means that the loop should never run because the condition is always false. Well, here I put do console.log building blocks. What this does is that even though this is false, it will still run whatever that's inside do once. So in this case, I will output building blocks once to the console, even though the condition for the while loop is false. Oh yeah.
Okay. Hi. I know it's 45 more minutes to lunch, which is a while, and attention span has been going down a bit. So if you are hungry and you would like a snack to tide you until lunch starts, you can come to the front now. You have 1 minute to get some snacks.
Actually, I'm so excited for snacks.
You have until 11:44.
How many seconds?
Oh, it's like 11:44 now. Like 30 more seconds.
Bro.
Please don't take more than you need. 1 is enough. If not, we won't have enough for everyone. Sorry, bro. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'll try to come in again for a second round if you need, but yeah, you can continue.
Okay. Hope everyone is feeling refreshed with the snacks. All right. Okay, I'll just continue on right now with break and continue. So what break does is that it will exit a loop, whereas what continue does is that it will skip the current iteration of a loop. So let me give you an example. Over here, I have a similar example as my first for loop, right? But except here, I create a condition. If I is equals to 5, I break. What this means is that if I is equals to 5, I will exit my for loop completely. Thus, what happens here is that it will only output 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because when I is equals to 5, break happens and my loop is exited completely. In my second example here, for continue, I'll be skipping the current iteration of that loop. So I have basically the same code block here, just that instead of break, I now have continue. In this case, what happens is that it will skip when I is equals to 5. So in this example here, I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This will work fine. But when I is equals to 5, continue will happen. It will skip the iteration when I is equals to 5. And thus it will go to the next iteration where I is equals to 6, and it will continue printing 6, 7, 8, 9 until the condition is false when I is equals to 10. So just like arrays and just like objects, you can also nest loops. So if one loop is nested inside another one, it's called a nested loop. So bear with me on this example as I will explain how two nested loops will work together. So let's first consider when I equals 0 and j equals 0. What will happen is I'll have I equals 0, then my for loop for j will keep iterating through. So for j equals 0, j equals 1, j equals 2. That's why what we printed out here, what will be printed out here is 0, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. So once 2 is hit, right? When j becomes 3, this becomes false. Thus, I will go to my next iteration of the for loop, which is when I is equals to 1. So then my j loop here will keep printing again. 1, 0, 1, 1, and 1, 2. Then when j is equals to 3, condition becomes false. I will exit this loop. I will then go to where I is equals to 2. This j loop will happen again. So I'll have 2, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 2. And then finally, after when j is equals to 3, I exit the loop. Then I will also be equals to 3. So thus I'll exit the outer loop, and that's how my code will end. So by doing this, you're able to run 2 for loops that are nested inside each other. Oh, by the way, if you all still want snacks, there's still more here. But I'll just go on first. Okay, next I'll go over what happens if you break a nested loop. If you break a nested loop, only your inner loop will be exited and your outer loop will still run. So in this example over here, I have I equals 0 and j equals 0. So I have the same example from previously. But now I create a condition. If I is equals to 1 and j is equals to 1, I will break. The question is now, do I break my inner loop or will I also break my outer loop? The answer is I'll only break my inner loop. And let me explain why. Here I have the console.log statement, right, to print out I and j. So in the first run, my I is 0, my j is 0. So what will happen, all I printed out is, when I is 0, this inside loop will run, j equals 0, 1, 2. Now, when j is equal to 3, this condition is false. I will exit this for loop. I will then have I equals to 1. So when I equals to 1, j equals 0 is okay. But if you look at the condition, when I equals 1 and j equals to 1, there's a break statement here. What this means is that I will exit my inner loop completely, and I will go to the next iteration of the outer loop. So thus, I will only print 1, 0 because the inner loop will break at 1, 1. So after breaking my outer loop, it will go to I equals to 2, and thus the code will still run for j equals 0, 1, 2. So therefore, what's going to be output will be 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. And that's why the output here will be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, and then 1, 1, it breaks, then 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2. So an important note about loops, do not create a condition that is always true. And do not create a condition which you can never break out of. Because if you do, then you will create an infinite loop. Your loop will run forever and the entire program will crash. So please always make sure that you have a condition to break out of your loop. Exercise 8, I will skip this. Once again, as I mentioned, it's inside the folder that you've downloaded, and the answers will be on the speakers version of the slides that I will upload at the end of the day. Okay, so now we'll go on to chapter 13 and 14, which is on document, object model, and events. So this is the part, as you all have seen right now, you all have been just doing pure JavaScript. Now, this part of the lecture, this part of the workshop will be on integrating JavaScript together with other technologies such as HTML and CSS in order to build your entire website. Before we go into document object model, right, we need to understand what is an API. So an API is short for Application Programming Interface. What this does is that it will allow your applications to communicate with each other. So inside APIs, we have browser APIs. Browser APIs allow you to access browser data using JavaScript. So that means that browser and JavaScript can interact with each other. Then, as a subset of browser APIs, we also have the DOM API, the Document Object Model API. This will allow you to manipulate individual HTML elements, which is what we'll be doing for the rest of the 2 chapters, 13 and 14. So let me bring you through how to build a DOM structure. So here we have some HTML, right? So I want you all to follow my cursor as we go through the text. Here I have HTML, right? Inside HTML, I basically have 2 tags, head as well as body. And within head and body, I have more tags. For example, within head, I have the title tag. And within body, I have my H1, H2, H3 tags. So think about this as like a tree. How do I visualize HTML as a tree? Well, what I can do is I can draw something like this. So you can see, inside HTML, I have 2 tags, my head and my body. Inside head, I have 1 tag, which is title, And inside body, I have my H1, H2, and H3 header tags. So let's go through some nomenclature. How do we refer to all of these nodes? Well, your root node is what's at the top. In this case, your root node will be HTML. So all of your other nodes will be your descendant nodes. Next, we'll go into parent nodes. Parent nodes basically means it's an element that will contain child nodes. So for example, head is the parent of title, and body is the title of, body is the parent of H1, H2, and H3. So conversely, title is the child of head, and H1, H2, H3 is the child of body. Sibling nodes basically mean that they share the same parent. So for example, H1, H2, and H3, they're all sibling nodes because they share the same parent of body. Next, descendant nodes means that you can reach the node by going down the DOM tree. So on top is the more general one. If you go down, it becomes more specific. So for example, head is a descendant of HTML and title is a descendant of head. Ascendant nodes is the opposite. It's basically an element that is higher up in the DOM tree. For example, HTML is an ascendant of head, and head is an ascendant of title, for example. So this is very important when we want to refer to how nodes are relative to each other in HTML inside a DOM structure. Before we continue also, very quickly, I'm not sure whether this has been covered inside HTML, but in CSS and JavaScript, if you want to enter CSS and JavaScript directly into HTML, you can do so by using the style and the script tags. So style is used to write your CSS in HTML. You write your CSS code between the opening style and the slash style, which is the closing style. For script, you can use it to write JavaScript in HTML. You write your JavaScript code between script as well as slash script. So the first part I'll be talking about is get element by ID. So what this does is that you will get an object that represents the HTML element with the ID. So just a quick recap that in HTML, all of the IDs are unique. So you cannot have two elements with the same ID. So this is very useful if you want to select which element you want to change or modify. For example, let me give you an example here. In my code example, I want to have this web page with text in black, but if I click on change color, the text will be blue. So how exactly do I do that? Well, we can incorporate JavaScript. So we'll create a paragraph with ID of text with the words here. We also create a button, and on click of the button, we will point towards this function over here. The function will be defined inside the script text over here, change color. The text of the button is called change color. Now, inside this function, this is where we enter our JavaScript code. So if you want to modify the text, right, we'll have to use document.getElement by ID of this ID. In this case, the ID it will be text. And we'll store this as a variable so that we can easily modify this. So now we'll just use text.style.color in order to change the color from black to blue. Because now we're setting the text.style.color to blue. So I'll be elaborating more on how element.style works later in the chapter on events. And that's why the text cannot change from black to blue. So do also note that your document object model will not change when your style changes because you are not injecting new HTML. You're just changing the CSS of your web page. Next, I'll be going on to CSS selectors. Not sure whether this was covered, but I'll just do a brief intro again. So CSS selectors is used when you want to find which HTML elements that you want to style. So some examples of CSS selectors are the following. If I have no prefix, it means that I'm selecting an element name. For example, a paragraph or a header 1 or a header 2 or like a header 6, for example. H1, H2, H3, and so on. If I want to select an ID, I'll use a hashtag. If I want to select a class, I'll use a dot. And if I pick the asterisk here stands for I want to select all elements. So in CSS, it's not like in JavaScript, the asterisk stands for multiplication, right? In CSS, your asterisk here stands for selecting all elements. And we will visit this later, where asterisk stands for select all elements in the workshop later on SQL. All right, so now I'll be going on to query selector. It is broader than get element by ID because in this case, you're returning the first element that will match that specific CSS selector. So again, it's example time. I have 2 lines of a paragraph and a button that says change color. When I press change color, I want to change the color of the first line to building blocks, to blue, while the second line will still remain as black. So how exactly do I do that? Well, what I can do is I can use query selector. So do note that building blocks and December 2025, these are both paragraphs, right? I have my button once again. Nothing has changed about this button, but what has changed is what's inside this function. I will use document.query selector, and inside query selector, I will put what is the CSS selector that I want to choose. This will get the first element that matches this CSS selector. In this case, I put P. P here stands for paragraph, so I'll be finding the first instance as a paragraph, which is just our building blocks. So I will store this as a variable called text so that I can use this for later. Similarly, I'll just do text.style.color. I'll set this to blue, and what will be returned to me is, well, I'll only change the first paragraph to blue. The second one will still remain as black after I press the button change color. Once again, a recap that DOM does not change when the style changes because I'm not injecting new HTML inside my web page. So just like replace, where I have replace and replace all, query selector all is much broader. It allows me to get all of the elements that matches that CSS selector. So example now, what if I want to change both of my text to blue, even though they are different paragraphs? Well, by using query selector all, let's look at this paragraph over here. I've changed to query selector all P. So I will be getting all of the elements that match this CSS selector, which is the paragraph. So one thing about query selector all is that it will return a node list. But don't be afraid of node lists. Think about them like arrays. My elements are easily accessible using a bracket notation. And how I can iterate through all of the elements inside my node list is that I can use a for loop. So by using a for loop, here I have the counter variable I equals 0. My condition is I less than text length. So if my I here hits the text length, then I will stop turning the elements into blue. So by doing this, text I, meaning that I'm accessing, okay, imagine that my node list now has 2 elements, building blocks as well as December 2025, with the indexes 0 and 1 respectively. So I will go to text 0, which is building blocks first. I'll change the style and color to blue. Then after that, I'll go to December 2025, which is with index 1, to change the style and color to blue. That is why I'm able to iterate through all of the paragraphs, and I'm able to change all of the paragraphs from black to blue. So once again, my DOM does not change when my style changes. So now I've hit the part where I'm injecting new HTML into the DOM. Well, how can I do this? I can do this using inner HTML. HTML structure of an element just by using a string. Basically, I'm just injecting new HTML into my document object model. So it's example time. From here onwards, whatever is on top is the web page, and whatever is at the bottom will be the DOM for the web page. So my task here is that I want to add the word JavaScript on the click of the button add language. So how do I do that? Well, I can use inner HTML to inject this JavaScript into my document object model. So a different scenario this time, I have a header 1, my favorite language, and I want to inject it as a list item. So what I can do is that I will have to define a new UL. UL here stands for unordered list. I said this wasn't gone through in HTML CSS, but if I want to define a new unordered list, meaning a list where each of the points are bullet points, you'll use UL. Inside here, my ID is list, so that I can use it for get element by ID later. I have a button here where on click it'll bring me to the function add item. So now let's go to the JavaScript part, right? I want to inject JavaScript as a list item. How can I do this? Let's just say I can create a new variable called language with the value of JavaScript. Then I want to be able to edit this list. What I can do is document.getElementById, by ID, and inside the parentheses, I'll put list because I want to get the ID of this unordered list. I'll set it as a variable, and I can just use list.innerHTML. What I'll do now is that I will append this part over to my list. In this case, this is li, which is basically a new list object. Language basically is JavaScript, as well as /li, which is to close the list, item. So what happens after this is that if I press add language button, right, what will happen is that I'll have a new unordered list item here that comes up in a bullet point called and DOM changes, because I'm injecting new elements into my document object model. As you see here, previously I only have the H1, right, and unordered list with nothing inside, which is over here, and a button, as well as my script. Now, after I have added a new bullet point here, I'm basically adding a new list item into my unordered list. And this is where I am basically injecting new HTML into my document object model. Text content is similar. What text content does is that it's used to add plain text into your DOM. So basically, instead of defining with your HTML, you just be adding plain change from BuildingBloCS December Conference 2025 on the click of a button. I want to press and it will change to JavaScript for web development. How I'll do that is I'll have a paragraph with ID of text with BuildingBloCS December Conference 2025. I have a similar button with the function change text. Inside my script, this is where my function is, change text. What I'll do is I'll use document.getElementById text. So this will actually reference this paragraph over here. Then I'll use .text content because I want to change the plain text content of what is of this. I'll set this as JavaScript for web development because this is the text that I want to replace it with. That I want to replace BuildingBloCS December Conference 2025 with. So this is all I need. Thus, this will happen where if I press course name, my BuildingBloCS December Conference 2025 will change to JavaScript for web development. Now, the question here is, does my DOM change? The answer is my DOM will not change. The reason is because I am not injecting or I'm not removing things from HTML. I'm only just merely changing the value of what the paragraph tag holds. That is why my document object model does not change. Next, I'll go on to create element. So what this does is that you can, well, as its name suggests, you will create your own element. So you'll specify the tag name within your parentheses after create element, and you will add it to the document object as a child of another object, as a child of another element using append child. So it's example time once again. I have here just one button called course name, and then after that, if I press course name, I want JavaScript for web development to appear. So how do I do that? Well, I can create my button here with onClick that directs to the function course name. After that, I can create a div. You might have remembered div from HTML. So a div is sort of like a container that I can use to store other of my HTML elements. My ID here is container because I want to use it later. Now, inside this function, let's see what I'll put. First and foremost, I want to create an element, which is a paragraph. So what I'll do is document.createElement, and I want to specify a tag name. So the tag name here is a P because it's a paragraph. I'll let this take the variable new paragraph. After that, now I want to add in what is the text content that I want inside the paragraph. In this case, what I'll do is new paragraph from here, dot text content. I'll use the equal sign and I'll set this as JavaScript for web development. This means that this new paragraph here will have JavaScript for web development as its plain text. After which, now I want to append this paragraph over here to the website, right? I want to append it, right? How do I do so? Well, I can store it inside the div. So my ID here is container. So what I'll do is I'll use getElementById. Inside the parentheses, I'll put container. So document.getElementById container. I'll see this as a variable container. And if I want to add this into the container, which is this div over here, what I can do is container.append child, new paragraph. So do remember that here is you're using append child because think about it as the div being the parent and the new paragraph being the child in the DOM. You'll see more in the next slide where I go through the exact diagram. But for now, remember container, which is here, dot append child, new paragraph, which is the new element that you have created using create element. So as I mentioned just now, the DOM will change. And here I'm basically creating a new paragraph and I'm attaching it as a child to the parent called div. So that's why you will use append child. So this I'll go on to remove child. So remove child is the exact opposite of append child. Instead of adding a node into my document object model, now I'm removing a node from my document object model. So the syntax for remove child is as follows. I'll be using parent dot remove child, and inside the brackets, I'll put child. Basically, parent node dot remove child, child node. Okay, example time once more. So here I have a website that says with a bullet point will be removed, the button that says remove text. What I want to do is that once I click that button, I want to remove the bullet point that says will be removed. So how exactly do I do that? Well, as you can see over here, I have an unordered list here with ID of list. And here I have a list with a list item with the ID of text that says will be removed. So this is my bullet point, right? I also have my button with on click that has this function over here. So this function, how do we accomplish this? Well, what I can do is I can use document.getElementById, and inside the parentheses, I'll have list because I want to select this list. Now, I want to remove this text, right? So I will use getElementById once more. What is inside this parenthesis will be text because this is the ID. So I'll use document.getElementById text. I'll save this as text. So what this does is that now I can now manipulate my parent as well as my child inside my JavaScript. Let's analyze the DOM one more time. So as you can see, right, my li, which is my list item, this is a child of my unordered list. My unordered list is the parent, and the list item is the child. Just like in HTML over here, you can see that my li's are inside my ULs. So this proves that my UL is a parent, my li is a child. So how do I do this? How do I then use remove child? What I can do is I can use list.removeChild text, because list here refers to the unordered list, so it's a parent. Text here refers to text over here, so it's a list item. So this is the child. So therefore, the correct syntax to use is list.removeChild text. And that's why when I press remove text, what is supposed to happen is will be removed will actually be removed. And if you look at the DOM, what happens is that my list item here is gone because now I don't have a list item as a child anymore. So hence I'm removing the child. Is this the last part? Yes, last part of DOM is about setting attributes. So as you all have learned from HTML, CSS, your elements may have attributes. For example, an image might have a source that takes the that allows you to get that allows you to get the image of whatever that is the image of that URL. So you can use set attribute to add attributes to your HTML elements. So the syntax for this would be set attribute, attribute, and value. So it's example time one more time. Okay, I know it's very small, right? But can you all see that there's like a button over here? Over there, there's a button, right? So here originally I have an image here called which is the JavaScript logo. On the clicking of the button, I want to change it to this diagram over here, which explains how programming works. So how do I do that? Well, I can use set attribute to change the attribute of my HTML element. So this is the original. I have image ID with this ID, and this is the source, right? I also have a button which has a change image function attached to it. So now let's write the JavaScript part. Inside function.changeImage, what I'll do is first and foremost, I'll get element by ID because I want to modify this image. The ID is my image, so I'll use document.getElementById, by ID, my image, and I'll set this as img. Then after that, I will use img.setAttribute. Now inside the parentheses, I'll take two arguments. src, which is source, because this is what the attribute I want to change, as well as the value. So now I want to change my source to this new URL over here. So hence, what happens is that when I press the button, the source of the image will now change from JS to this image over here. All right, so that comes to the end of chapter 13, which is on the document object model. So now I'll be going over chapter 14, which is on events. So what exactly is an event in JavaScript? Basically, an event is something that triggers when your user interacts with your web page in some kind of way. So when we look at events, there are two main properties that we typically will need to take note of. The first one is the type. So what is the action that triggers the event? For example, a click on the mouse triggers an event. Pressing a key on your keyboard triggers an event. Or having a mouse hover over something can trigger an event. The second property is called the target property. This will be the element that triggers the event. For example, a button, as I've used previously, a button can trigger an event, an input field can trigger an event, or a list can trigger an event. So without further ado, let's go on to some event methods. So first and foremost, add event listener. What this is used to do is to listen to events. So the syntax of add event listener is as such. So I'll have the target property, which is what is the element that triggers the event. Target property dot add event listener, and inside the parentheses, I'll have two parameters, type as well as listener. So type is the action that triggers the event, and the listener here is the function that runs when my event is being fired. So in example time, let's just say I want to program the following. I have a input field there which says your name, and I have a text field that says hello ... So up there, right, I want it to be such that whatever that I input inside the text field, right, it will be automatically displayed and it will automatically replace the ... So how do I do that? Well, I can use events and event listeners in order to listen for any changes that happen to my input field. So I'll create an input field by using input with type of text. The ID here will be input, and the placeholder here will be your name. Basically, if there's nothing inside, then what will be displayed is your name. Now, below that, I'll also have a paragraph with an ID of greeting that just says hello ... Next, I'll be going into the script part. I will be letting input be equal to document.getElement by ID input, meaning that I want to get the input here with ID of input. So I want to modify this input field, right? Then after that, I also want to modify this ID. This paragraph over here. So I'll use document.getElement by ID greeting, because greeting is the ID here. I'll set this as the variable greeting. So now I have two of these. I can now modify two of these HTML tags. Next, I'll use input.addEventListener. So input is my target because this is the element that triggers my event. Whereas here, this input over here, this is the type, because this is the type of event this is the action that will trigger my event. So my type is input, and my function will be here. My listener will be the function. So here I'll type my entire function out. So how will my function work? Well, I can put let name is equals to input value, input.value. What input.value is if you track upwards, let input equals to this, which is this ID will be this input field. So input.value will be what is inside your input field. I'll let this be the variable name. So for the next part, now I'll be checking for the presence of a name. If there is a name, what I'll do is I'll use text content. I'll use greeting.text content. So this element over here, I'll change it to hello, and I'll add the name from here. I'll add the name to the end, and I'll use an exclamation mark. Now, what if there is no name provided? Then I'll use an else, and I'll put greeting.text content, and I'll just be hello ... So here is what if there's a presence of a name. Here is if there's no presence of a name, meaning that my input field will be empty. That's how I'm able to get this, such that if I input something into the text field, there'll always be an event listener listening out for what is happening. So if I type something inside, then the ... will be replaced by the name, else it'll just say hello ... So just like how you can add event listeners, you can remove event listeners. So you can use it to stop listening for an event on an element. So the syntax is very similar, just target.remove event listener with type and listener as your parameters. So this is an example that I think is a bit confusing, but do bear with me as I try to explain what remove event listener does. Let's just say, right, I have a button here that's called click me. After clicking the button, this alert message will pop up that says button click. But what if I only want the alert message to come out only once? That means if I click me for a second time, this alert message will not come up again. How do I do this? I can use remove event listener. So in this case, I have a button with ID of my button. Now inside the script, I will use document.getElement by ID to get the ID of my button, and I'll save it as a variable button. Now, first and foremost, I need to add an event listener, right? So I'll use button.addEventListener. Inside the type is click, and the listener is handle click. Now, handle click will be here. This is the function handle click. In this case, what will happen inside this function is I'll have the alert message. Inside alert, I'll have button click. After that, I will put button.removeEventListener, and I'll put the type and the listener. In this case, I created with type click and listener handle click. So therefore, I'll remove event listener also with type click and listener handle click. That means if I click the button, if I click the button, this function will run where I'll get an alert, and this event listener, which is here, will no longer be valid. And that's why after I click the button once, the second time, there'll be no more event listeners anymore. So that's how you remove an event listener from an element inside by using JavaScript. So I've introduced to you add event listener, and you might also have experienced inline event handlers from my earlier examples in chapter 13. So the question is, which one is better? The answer is add event listener is better than inline event handlers. So add event listener basically means that I'll put it inside script text. I will put .add event listener with the type as well as the listener. For an inline event handler, it'll just be inside the HTML. I'll just put on click equals to and whatever function. So add event listener is better because of two reasons. One is that add event listener, you are allowed to attach multiple event listeners. You can just keep using .add event listener multiple times. But then for an inline event handler, you realize that I can only put one event listener. So that is a limitation. Second reason is because add event listeners will separate your HTML and your JavaScript. As you can see over here, my HTML is on top, my JavaScript is purely written inside script. Whereas for an inline event handler, it will mix your HTML with your JavaScript, which might be a bit confusing for some people. All right, my last two examples already. So first and foremost will be on element.style. So element.style is basically a CSS part now. How do we incorporate CSS with JavaScript? Well, element.style is used to get or set the style of an element. So you can actually set many CSS properties, for example, color, font size, etc. So a very similar example as just now, but let's just say now I want to change my the text building blocks from black to red just by pressing the button change style. So how do I do that? Well, same example, paragraph with ID of name and a button with ID of button. Now, inside my JavaScript, this is where it gets a bit more complicated. So now, just now in chapter 13, when I referenced element.style, I used my inline event handlers. But now I'll demonstrate how to do so using add event listener. So I have document.getElement by ID of button. So you get the ID of this button over here. And I'll save this as the variable button. Then I'll use button.addEventListener. So I'll be adding an event listener to this button over here. My type will be a click, and I want to run the function change color. So inside function change color, this will occur where I will first and foremost use getElement by ID to get the to select the paragraph here with the ID of name, and I'll save this as the variable name. Then after that, I'll modify by using name.style.color, and I'll set this to red. So thus, when I press the button, what will happen is this function will run where I get the ID of this, and I'll change the style color to red. And that's why when I press change style, I'll be able to change the style from black to red. This is the last part already. Okay, this is the last example already. So the last example will be on element.classList. What this does is that you can add, remove, or toggle your classes on an element. So recall your classes are represented by dot followed by the name of the class. For example, .font is a class because it starts with a dot. So for the last example, what if I want to have building blocks in black and I want to interchangeably switch between red and black just by pressing change style? Well, what I can do is, first and foremost, inside my CSS side, I'll define a class .font with the color of red. All right. Next, once again, create a paragraph with ID of name, and also create a button with the ID of change style. Now we'll go into the JavaScript part. First and foremost, we want to change the properties of name. So what we'll do is document.getElement by ID, and inside the parentheses, I'll have name. I'll save this as the name variable. Then after that, I also want to add event listener to button. So what I can do is document.getElement by ID change style, because change style is the ID of my button. I'll save this as the variable button. So then I'll add event listener with the type of click and this following function. So if the button is being clicked, this function will run, but I'll use name.classList.toggle. Toggle means that I will basically be selecting and unselecting that whatever that I specify inside here. In this case, it will be font. So I'll be selecting and unselecting the class font. So thus, what happens is, by default, my text is black. But if I press the button, the class will be on, and thus my color will be red. If I press it one more time, then my font will change back to black color. So thus, that's why over here, from black to red, if you go from black to red and red to black, just by pressing the button, change style over there. Okay, so this comes to the end of 14 chapters of JavaScript. As I mentioned, I'm not going through exercise 9. Exercise 9 is the longer one because I'll be incorporating JS into HTML. But as I mentioned before, I'll be pumping out the answers in my speaker slides through Discord after day 2 ends. So finally, we have hit chapter 15 on the conclusion, right? So what exactly have you learned in this workshop? It's a very long 3.5-hour workshop. But so let's summarize what have you learned. You have learned about data types, right? Data types, there are 3 main ones: strings, numbers, and booleans. And inside these data types, and you can store this data in what we call variables. You've also learned about functions. Functions allow you to organize and to reuse your code. Then you also have arrays and objects, where you can use it to manage complex collections of data, either arrays having only the data, or in objects where you have key and value pairs. Debug techniques, I did skip this, but it's quite self-explanatory. The whole gist of debug techniques is I'm teaching how to identify the types of errors in JavaScript, as well as how to introduce, how to basically debug what is going on inside the if you encounter any errors in JavaScript. It's only about 7 slides, so I think it's quite easy to understand. So the last part is on DOM and events, the document object model and events. Here we are integrating HTML and CSS together with JavaScript in order to make the web pages even more dynamic. So, of course, what I've covered today is just the gist, right? It's just the basics of JavaScript. Well, there are actually a lot more advanced concepts in JavaScript that I originally wanted to cover, but I realized that I have no time. So, for example, higher order functions, regex, which is your regular expressions, classes, recursion, basically repeating things, and functional programming. So if you want to learn more, I will suggest this resource over here called www.freecodecamp.org. This link, I'll bump it out later also, but this gives you a very, very good starting into how to use JavaScript inside web development. It's really very comprehensive, and if you are very interested in JavaScript, I would highly encourage you to use this resource in order to learn more JavaScript. Also, I have a DOM visualizer attached here. If you all realized in the previous chapters, 13 and 14, right, where I have the DOM tree, I actually did use this DOM visualizer over here, where I pasted my HTML, and the DOM tree was able to appear. So if you all need a resource to view the DOM, please do consider using this resource over here. So what's next in December conference for JavaScript? Actually, there are another 3 more workshops that built onto this workshop. First and foremost is React and Next.js. You'll be doing React and Next.js tomorrow morning with TechPy. Basically, React is a JavaScript library that's used to build user interfaces, and Next.js is a framework that runs on React. Next, you'll be doing Anime.js also. That will be tomorrow afternoon, which will be our last workshop for the day. Anime.js is a JavaScript library that's used to create animations. And last but not least is databases. In databases, we'll be running SQL queries, and we will learn how to add SQL queries into our JavaScript code. So that will also be conducted by me. That will be later at 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. where I'll teach you all how to integrate HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then follow up by SQL. So we have come to the end of the workshop, but if I could spare you all about 5 minutes to do my feedback form, that would be greatly appreciated. Please do be honest about your feedback. I can take criticism, but also do please be respectful. As I mentioned just now, 3.5 hours is not a lot of time for JavaScript. I skipped quite a lot of things, like chapter 11, the 4 exercises also. I deleted quite a lot of things. So when you all receive the speaker version of the slides, you'll realize that there are things that I've actually excluded from this version of the slides. So if you all want to, please do fill up your feedback form. This feedback will also be used for future conferences, so that I know where to add stuff and where to like take out stuff. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's a different question. The link. Wow, I need to put up the link. Keep it. Let me just read this real quick. Wait, sorry. For those online, I'll just stop screen sharing for now. Since I did do it. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah. Wait, sorry, I don't have the link for you. I don't have the link for the feedback form. I only have the QR code. But what I can do is I can just scan the QR code real quick and send the link via Discord. Okay, sorry. The person who asked where's the link, I sent the link to Discord already. Under December conference workshop materials. Wait. Yeah, December conference workshop materials under JavaScript. Anyone needs more time for the feedback? If no one needs more time for the feedback, y'all can do it on your own time also. But if there's nothing else already, then yeah, sorry. I mean, if there's nothing else already, then this comes to the end of the workshop for JavaScript. I know it's a lot to take in, but if you need to, do reread and do ask questions in Discord. Otherwise, this is the end. Thank you for listening and all the best for the hackathon. Feel free to leave for lunch now, by the way. And come back at 1:30 for SQL. Thank you.
That's so unfair. What? Spending
By the way, just feel free to leave because I have been told that I need to keep looping this video forever until I come back.